right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos, and I am joined today by Paul from the YouTube channel Manifesto, and of course, Father Michael Butler. I think everybody's going to be familiar with you, sir. You've been on here a few times. And your YouTube channel, Average the Alpha, both of which are tagged in the video title.
Thank you.
And I'll have, I think I just need to add your direct link, Father. I got Paul's in the video description. I'll do that while we're chatting. But anyways, thank you guys for hopping on. Really appreciate you guys being here. How's your day going?
Doing well here. Yeah, it's been a long day, but here over in Europe, it's heading on towards 10:10. So yeah, in the evening.
Yeah, you've had more day than we've had, so
True.
To go first. Yeah, it's going well here. As I was saying before we got on, I just got back from 3 days clergy convocation with the Diocese of the Midwest. So we had time with brother clergy that I haven't seen in 6 months or a year, and nice hierarchical liturgy with my Archbishop. Some very good discussion. We had several presentations from one of the professors from St. Vladimir's Seminary on the reception of converts and why we do some of the things we do, and what are some abiding issues that, or some new issues that have come up given, current situations that the church would do well to address. So I think the Holy Synod will be considering some of those questions. I don't know the details of it. That's above my pay grade.
Well, I don't know how much you're able to reveal, but I'm curious, today's topic will be about masculinity, young men, the ways in which society is undermining them. Was that mentioned at all in your guys' retreat? I mean, I know that I believe the OCA is responsible for the statistic that showed that 75% of all new converts are men under the age of 45.
No, it did not come up in sort of the formal discussions, but my continuing and persistent interest in young men and their well-being and optimizing their lives. I asked every priest that I could get my hands on. It says, so you got an increase in young men coming to your parish. It is universal across the Midwest. In fact, so much so that the Archbishop himself commented and said, yeah, the census of the diocese is up noticeably, and it's because there has been such an influx of people into the church. I don't say this to brag. I have experienced unprecedented growth in my parish since the beginning of the year. I have something like 66 people who have come to my church.
Wow.
And that's some families transferring in from other parishes, to be sure, but a lot of new people moving into the area. I'm, outer ring suburban Detroit, so we get a lot of people transient for work, moving in and out of the area for jobs and all. But there's been stupendous interest, particularly among young men, coming to the church, and there's scarcely a Sunday that goes by that I don't have at least one visiting.
Yeah,
I just met an Orthodox Christian from this side of the pond, close to London, who's in a parish there. They just baptized 43 people this Lazarus Saturday. Lazarus Saturday. 43 baptisms, and it's crazy.
Wow. Was that a Greek or a Russian church? Not that it matters too much. I was just curious. And
they're a Russian tradition.
Wow. Mm-hmm. I know there's a lot of propaganda in the Anglosphere regards to Russia. That's why I was curious in the UK if people were even converting to the Russian church. That's fantastic.
We've had Nazi symbols spray painted on the doors of the Orthodox Cathedral in Copenhagen.
Wow. Mm-hmm. I'm not surprised. My fiance in Germany, she recently went to a large gathering of ROCOR there in Germany. That was an annual event, and she was highlighting, I think she talked to a few people, how much their church is also growing in Germany, which is fantastic. So seems to be a phenomenon happening across the Western world, for sure. So which again, glory to God for that. Mm-hmm. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about masculinity, young men, ways in which society undermines masculinity and sort of directs them in an aberrant understanding of who they are and who they should be. Just to get the conversation started, I thought maybe we could begin with your guys' take, because I know both of you work a lot with men in regards to masculinity, developing themselves, achieving their goals, building confidence, getting set and positioned in their life. What is masculinity? How would you guys describe it? I'm sure we'll have some different conceptions, or at least descriptions. And what does it mean to be a man in the 21st century? Maybe it doesn't mean any different from the 17th century, but I'm just curious. I'll begin there. Anybody wants to pick it up?
I'll be the young and ambitious one. Well, certainly to be a man in the 21st century, the new part of it is that it means to be under attack, I would say. So I think it's very appropriate, the title that you used for this video. But what we've spoken about in our talks is that masculinity is that which we love and appreciate about other men when we're in male company. That's what it is. So we define it exclusively as a positive thing. It is something that is obviously can shift and change, but there's also a timeless aspect to it, things that are stable and true and that last throughout time as well, and something that we all recognize without being able to pin it down in some kind of very, very scientific way. But it's something that when we see it, we know what it is. And certainly the words that we would normally connect with the most in the work that I've been doing would be strength, stability, virtue, courage, discernment, wisdom, and perhaps vision as well is something that we also really use a lot. Visionary leadership, I think, is something that's really needed today as well, to be able to see where we're headed and be able to formulate it in a way that other people can understand it and get them on board with that as well. It's like core masculine traits that we appreciate in other men.
Yeah, I can build on that and affirm every bit of it. But for me, the way that I typically put it, it's become kind of a trope with me, is first of all, our masculinity is first of all a gift to us from God,
right?
For which we should be grateful. I mean, it's part of our constitution as his creatures, but as men, but it's something for which we should be grateful. And because we are grateful for what God has given us, we can in turn use those masculine characteristics, those attributes, and those qualities in service to other people. Okay. And that is where mature masculinity begins to come in, because one of the differences between men and boys is that boys consume more than they produce,
right? And
men produce more than they consume, because the traditional things that men are expected to do, to procreate, protect, provide, and preside. When we're providing, we have to provide for our own needs so that we're not dependent on others anymore if we're going to be an adult. But it's typically been understood that men provide more than our own needs require, so that we have more in order to provide for a wife, for kids, to add value, to our employers, even to our churches, to the community at large. And the more that we are able to give of ourselves, outside of ourselves, to others, I think is one of the things that is most highly honored and respected in men. Paul said something that I hear very often. It's very hard to define what masculinity is, but we sort of know it when we see it.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I've been trying to take a stab at defining that a little more, and I don't have a firm definition, but there is a constellation of biological, neurological, psychological, and social attributes that go into making up who a man is. Their behaviors and roles in society, but there's also innate inherent characteristics, because we inhabit male bodies and have a Y chromosome, and a male brain,
right?
And the other physical attributes that we carry around with us, they're not just interior states or character traits, but they are also ways of acting in the world that are broadly recognized and appreciated. Despite the fact that, some masculinity sometimes gets a bad rap in the world today, just, wait for the next catastrophe to happen, and suddenly all of those toxic masculine traits are suddenly in rather high demand and respect.
Right.
I remember I was listening, I don't remember someone podcast something I was listening to recently where there was a man talking about, you remember the last time there was a mass shooting, and all of those husbands and boyfriends and all instinctively covered the bodies, of their women folk, or their girlfriends or their wives or their children. Said, women will cover their children instinctually from danger. Men will cover women and children like instinctually. It says we do it. We don't even think about it, and it's just one of those things that probably should be lauded a little more, that selflessness that men give, in service to others. There is, I forget the name of the award. Do you remember the name of that award that they give every year for like people who have died in selfless giving to others, like running into burning buildings, or I think there was one last year, some guy in London jumped into a river to save a woman and her child that had fallen into the river. The woman and the child were saved, but the young man himself was washed away and drowned. It's like, they're always looking to make this equitable and everything, but still like 85% of the recipients of this are all men, because it's just something that men do, and it should probably be, it's a characteristic of us, but it should also probably be underscored and celebrated, more that it is. So anyway, I'm a little off topic, but the long and short of it is, it's not just, masculinity is not just a social construct.
Right.
There are biological components to it that make us different from women. But yes, there are performative aspects as well. Some of them are socially conditioned. Yeah, absolutely. And there are social expectations. But at its core, there's something much more there. And that needs to be acknowledged and recognized.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, can I just add one more thing to that? Because now Father Michael mentioned like neurological, biological, all these different aspects, but now I'm not the priest, so Father Michael's here. There's a spiritual aspect to manhood as well, and that's an absolute part of manhood, which doesn't change over time as well. And I heard a podcast on Lord of Spirits. They had an episode called Priestcraft, and for me, that really just like a lot of things fell into place when I watched that. There's something incredibly masculine about priesthood and being a man, which is actually like, showing people, revealing like, divinity to other people, or being that conduit that somehow offers the creation up to God and shows other people God, and that kind of open conduit for that. And that's a really, really masculine thing. I think if there's one aspect that a woman, if I also think of my wife, when we got married, like a large part of it was like she saw like, okay, this man, if I follow him, that will lead me to God. That's going to be a part of my spiritual journey as well. And I think that's a central aspect that men need to understand their priestly role to be able to embody their masculinity more fully.
Yeah, I was going to kind of reiterate the mantra that I've put forward on this channel multiple times in regards to masculinity. I think it connects with what both you guys said, that I believe if we're looking at it at a more philosophical level, that it has to do with the preservation and the maintenance of boundaries, and order in society is, I believe, dependent upon men upholding boundaries. And where exactly those boundaries are is going to be influenced by your theological and philosophical presuppositions. And so when it comes to being a man and a Christian man, it's obviously going to be tied to virtue. It's going to be tied with, like Father Michael said, the protection of innocence, the protection of women and children, and recognizing that women and children are not operating at the same function in society that men do. I mean, you mentioned that example of the young man who saved the woman in the river, and there's a comment amongst the manosphere and the red pill community about the expendability of men, about men always having to build up their value, which I believe is true. But the expendability, I think also there's something very virtuous that they kind of miss on focusing of a man sacrificing himself for a larger purpose, for the protection of innocent people. And you mentioned the difference in brain structures or psychological dispositions. And I saw recently there was a peer-reviewed study that was getting a little bit of heat from the leftist progressive groups because it demonstrated that children, I believe this was 2 to 4 year old kids, they kind of put them in different situations where a problem would emerge. And the girls typically would begin to fuss or cry, the little girls, when an obstacle or something was put in their way that they had to figure out, where the boys would begin to try to problem solve. And so even problem solving itself is about maintaining the order of the world, the order of reality, putting things back into a place of fluidity. And so when we look at, and as we go further in our discussion on the societal attacks and undermining of masculinity, it really is an undermining of order, of logic, of reason, of structure. And this is a satanic demonic spirit that is influencing the world, but unfortunately leading to so many young men killing themselves. Outside of drug abuse, particularly fentanyl, the biggest killer of men is suicide.
Yes. It is the leading cause of death among men under 55 in the United Kingdom currently.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually the rates for suicide among young men and young women have both increased substantially since the proliferation of social media. But I think you're right. I think for men it is higher.
And
it is higher.
And I've said this before, and something that, again, I would say the red pill and the manosphere doesn't really address is, you know, for me and my own development of my own masculinity and self-perception, is it wasn't until I became Orthodox that I felt like I had something worthy to die for. And I really feel like that is tied to the development of a man. And when we look at, you're talking about the suicide rates in the UK, and obviously people are going to point to the nihilism of the world and the lack of meaning. And I think there's something really important to men having something they're willing to die for. I know more secular minded friends that I have that as soon as they had a child, their values began to shift in a much more traditional manner, because now they have a baby, and whether they're conscious of it or not, they have something that they're willing to die for, and they kind of step up into that masculine role. So kind of just curious what your guys' thoughts are on that. You know, there's not a whole lot of discussion amongst the red pill about, like, what are you willing to die for? And when we talk, you know, I mentioned the expendability, which they do highlight all these men that have died in war throughout history.
Okay.
But again, that's about the maintaining of boundaries. That's about having something, your village, your people, your country, your religion, something worthy to die for.
Yeah. Paul can speak as, you know, as a, you know, someone currently engaged with the military with regards to expendability. I know, it's not fair.
Right.
When I first, you know, heard the simplest or the biological explanation of that was put to me one time. You know, sperm is cheap, eggs are expensive. You know, I mean, there's some biological, think about it.
It's true. I mean,
You
a
know?
60-year-old man, as long as he gets a young woman, she can get pregnant. Whereas,
yeah. But I mean, you know, they're just sort of on a very simple biological way. You know, a woman ovulates once a month. That makes her very valuable. You know, one man can impregnate quite a number of women, you know, so that makes us relatively cheap in that respect. You know, that's no moral argument, you know, and I'm not pushing it, you know, further than just, you know, stating the simple fact of it. But you're right. There is an expendability. It doesn't mean that male lives are cheap, but, you know, there is a willingness and a willingness on men's part to put themselves. We have greater capacity for taking risk, you know, over women. It's just a common male trait to be much riskier in our behavior, you know, and all of sort of the jokes. Paul won't give this, but, you know, us in the United States, it's like, hey guys, watch this.
Yeah.
You just what catastrophe we about to see unfold before us here, you know, but guys will do that.
Right.
And with what was forgive me, the next one, not only the expendability of a higher purpose. I think this is one of the reasons why young men are coming to orthodoxy in such numbers. And I would be really curious to see if the viewers in the chat would comment on their own experience, if this resonates with them, that one of the real attractions in Orthodoxy is that it provides a real transcendent purpose for young men to serve. That maybe the military is a little tarnished nowadays, sort of patriotism is a bit tarnished in our age. But when people find Christ in his church that has real demands, solid roots, that's got serious structure, you know, high barrier for entry, you know, genuine accountability to a spiritual father, these are things that men crave and that they thrive when they get. And so when they come to Christ, they find this is someone and something that I can give myself heart and soul to. And I think it's one of the real draws that we have for young people today.
And when Paul mentioned that, you know, us men revere men when we see masculinity displayed, that expendability dimension is viewed as like a diminishing of value of men and society, and how this is a problem. But at the same time, whenever we think of a man in history, it's because he was able to sacrifice his own pleasure for a larger purpose.
Yeah.
And obviously Christ is the ultimate example of that. Nobody would say that he was expendable, but he embodies that, what masculinity is, you know. And I think that there's a lot of talk about masculinity, and Christ is rarely ever mentioned as a masculine role model, even though I would argue that many aspects of his life mission and the salvific work that he accomplished was absolutely masculine. And that's something that we, whether we're conscious of, really revere in men, whether it be military or people that died in battle, or again, as a father, sacrificing your own pleasure for the maintenance and protection and provisions of your family.
Yeah, Paul, would you speak to this from your experience in the Danish military? Because I'm surely, you know, that
I've been thinking a lot about this over the last year or 2 years or something like that. It's been really interesting seeing here how, you know, the response to the war in Ukraine has been, and the way that where people are reacting. And I've also been thinking a lot about, you know, how NATO and the West is viewing war. And it's very clear that we put our faith in our equipment these days, and all the conversations and all the talk is about all of our equipment and our gear and stuff like that. And I believe that the reason why, you know, we've been losing wars, if you look at Afghanistan, Iraq, you know, the greatest military power in the entire world has actually lost wars to, you know, groups of very under-equipped villagers, you know, mujahideen, but it's been men who have believed in a God, believed in a transcendent purpose. I actually read the most well-known biography by a Danish special service soldier who was in Afghanistan, and he spoke about when he was sent off on his first mission, just before they got on the helicopter, and then a priest came and had to like give them a blessing before they were going, and he just had this revulsion towards this priest coming and giving him this blessing, and he just was like, get away with your tradition, da, 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 da. And when I read that, it just became so clear to me, like, that's the reason why we're not winning wars anymore, why we've lost this, because men are, they're there for themselves. And so this guy today, he's like a kind of like doing the personal coaching for the Crown Prince of Denmark, and, you know, it's like hang out with the stars and stuff like that, because he's this big hotshot special services guy. And so we've built a society of individualists, and we've lost this understanding that a man's life has value when he's able to offer it in service, and eventually even, you know, offer the entire of his life, not just in some kind of abstract way, and not also just in some kind of like final, you know, action movie, something like that, but, you know, very much in every single day of my life, I view it myself as like I'm offering my life to my family, to my wife, to my children, as that's what I'm giving my life up for. And
right.
And I don't know exactly how fast that's going to happen and what's going to happen with it, but, you know, looking at what's happening now in the West, then there's this massive drive to, first of all, find all of the scandals that they possibly can of harassment and abuse or whatever it is. So we're constantly being told that we have to report each other inside the military. And while this is happening, then there's also this massive drive to treat men and women completely equal. So just 2 months ago now, or 1.5 months ago, conscription has been now made mandatory for all men and women and men are treated exactly identically throughout the conscription process now. So women and men, and in many cases, some cases you still get to sleep separately, but that's not even possible all the time anymore. So in some cases you're just like together, men and women all together. So we're trying, they're driving really hard to eradicate any differences between men and women, but at the same time, pushing people together in this way, and then looking for like this confirmation that like, oh, it's all just about like men raping women and they're like bad and evil and toxic masculinity, you know, and it's completely destroying the armed forces. So, you know, several years ago, the Danish military decided, okay, we need to have one brigade that's ready to go to war with like 60 days warning or something like that. And they've been trying to do this for several years now, and they just can't get the people in. Everything's just falling apart, and the equipment's falling apart, and they can't get anything connected because we're just not ready. We don't have the people, we don't have the resources, we don't have the spirit to do it anymore. So it's very concerning.
Yeah, I was going to make a comment right before you went on there, and it totally ties into what I was going to say about the military. And in the West, I know of Orthodox Christian men that have young sons, about 16, 17 years old, and they're terrified of the fact that they might have to be forcibly enlisted in the United States to fight for wars that they don't believe in, and basically send their children off to the meat grinder of these forever wars. And, you know, one of the big differences I noticed between my father, who was a helicopter pilot in the Army, is that he's still, you know, this idea that defending your country, fighting in the military, this was always deemed as a incredibly virtuous and masculine cause. But in the 21st century, who wants to, fight for Western governments when they're aiding in the degeneracy and the debauchery that's being spread around the world? And so that's why I think the Orthodox Church is so important. Getting back to something worthy to die for, I don't think, at least for me, and I would imagine for most people watching, dying for one of the militaries of these Western governments, that doesn't seem like something worthy to stand that on that line for. Whereas the preservation of the ancient church, following the ways of the saints, potentially being martyred, protecting your family, your wife, and your children, that seems to be one of the last vestiges where men can actually find some type of authentic meaning and cause to die for. And so when you're talking about the military and this equality of men and women, I view that as an Orthodox Christian as an attack on the Imago Dei, and that it's not that women are lesser than men. It's that due to the image of God, we have different roles. And this idea that we're interchangeable widgets is really a satanic, anti-Christian concept on human anthropology and the roles and functions that exist within society.
Yeah, I'll put here in the chat. You reminded me, and I happen to have the quotation handy. The English poet Wilfred Owen fought in World War I in the trenches, with the mustard gas and all of that. And one of his poems, he said, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce decorum est pro patria mori. How sweet and right it is to die for your country. Just as a flat statement, assumed always to be correct. I don't think the wars of the 20th century allow us to believe that anymore.
Right. No, I would definitely second that.
For my grandfather who liberated POW camps in Germany. He was a reinforcement for D-Day, went in the day after D-Day with Patton's army and liberated POW camps. Never talked about it. And I knew a lot who in my parishes have had Vietnam War vets,
right.
Some of the most, wounded men, and even the more recent conflicts. I have in my parish now 2 people with serious issues from fighting in the Middle East and the things that they were required to do and the things they saw. So I'm sorry, that's grim stuff. It
ties perfectly into, because the next point that I was going to bring up is, where do you guys see contemporary society? Where are the attacks on masculinity? What do you see as some of the biggest threats and attempts to undermine young men and their function and traditional role in society right now?
My oldest son is 17 years old. So his biology teacher in school every single week would tell him the only gender that matters is the one that you feel you are. That's the only one that matters. This is his biology teacher in a private Catholic school. So this isn't just like some mainstream state school, even. It's a private Catholic school.
Oh my gosh.
He just dropped out of gymnasium in Denmark. That's equivalent of high school, because he just doesn't feel like he's learning anything there. So he wants to be a full-time entrepreneur. So he's working for, he's doing development work on IT development work. But he just doesn't feel like so the education system has really become an indoctrination system. And
absolutely.
I've just finished reading a whole lot of Father Seraphim Rose. I read one of his books. I started with Nihilism. I actually had a depression for 2 weeks after reading it. It was terrible in some ways. But then I couldn't get it. So then I had to go like more and more and more and more. So I read.
God. Well, don't read the prophecies of the end times then. If nihilism.
But that was really like you just saw how it's in it's in the air we breathe in our society, and it really concerns me as well. And how So I have 3 sons, and I'm saying to my wife, like, we need to seriously consider homeschooling.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, how would you feel if, so you're talking about conscription in the Danish military, if yours, do you worry? I mean, what are your thoughts on your sons having to potentially fight in these NATO American wars against Russia? Which again,
in World War II, then when Germany decided they wanted to take Denmark, the fight lasted, I think, 23 minutes or something like that. So the Danish professional military, there's this thing, they have this saying like never again. But if something similar happens again, our strategy is like call Big Brother. That's you guys. If the Americans come, then we'll try like hide in a hole until you arrive. If the Americans aren't coming to help us, to save us, the same thing would happen again. We're not going to go fighting any Russians. Like we're a country of 5 million people. We don't have a fighting force of any real kind. So that's the Denmark at the most plays some kind of auxiliary support role. I don't actively think about that. I'm in the Danish Home Guard. My only job is in the Home Guard. I can never be sent abroad. I can only fight to defend Danish territory. So I will never have to fight outside of the country. And so, God help us. I hope I'll never have to do that. But if someone does come to this country to fight, then I'll defend my. I live on a little homestead, and I want to be as ready as I can for whatever happens in life. And that's been my goal with that training is to be as prepared as I possibly can. And I would like my sons to do that as well. And I don't think we're not like you guys. Like, if you look at the American military presence around the world, it's crazy. Denmark doesn't have that. We are running a camp in Kosovo though still, which is amazing for me. Like, it's like, what on earth are we doing down there? But somehow we're running yeah.
Well, that gets into, again, NATO's attack on Eastern Europe, Serbians, all that different stuff. But we'll leave that aside.
Yeah.
But, here in the U.S., I was just looking at, there's like a tracking of flights and planes by tail numbers. And you can see that the U.S. military is amassing large numbers of soldiers up in Alaska. And in regards to some of the NATO powers, they're also moving a lot of people into the Black Sea area, which it seems like building two fronts against Russia. And, I've been, one of my side obsessions for the last few months has been reading some of the prophecies from saints and elders and listening to people like Metropolitan Neophytos. And, it seems like we're in a very precarious situation historically. Right now, and with this globalized technological society and this immense hatred for Russia and really anybody who doesn't want to get on, the central banking debauchery system. And in October of 2024, BRICS is officially going to begin their rollout of their currency, and it's like 40 different countries are going to be there in Russia, and you just think, geez. So many things are accumulating right now. And of course, it's right before the U.S. presidential election where even more chaos we would suspect is going to break out. And it's just really unfortunate.
Yeah. If I can pull away from the political speculation a little bit, which, I have to be real careful in the kinds of things I say and about that. But what can we do for men nowadays? I think if you're not familiar with Scott Galloway's work,
I'm not familiar with him.
Okay, he's a business economics professor at Stern School of Business at New York University. He's been doing some very, very good work recently on men and the situation of young men because he's seen the decline of young men at the university. And I think he's got 2 boys. I think he's got 2 sons as well, and he's seeing their situation. Warning, he is a progressive. And so some of his prescriptions, I disagree with some of his prescriptions, but his description of the problem, I think, is some of the best I've seen in a long time. So if you catch him like on Chris Williams' podcast, you just put in Scott Galloway. He's writing a book on men and young men and their issues right now that I can't wait to see come out. But some of the things that he points out are the decline of young men in universities. We are almost to the point where there are 2 women for every man that's enrolled in the universities. And part of the problem is universities have reduced the number of people that they accept. It's like he went to Caltech or something. He was in California. And, when he went to school there, which was granted, 30, 40 years ago, the acceptance rate was like 75%. If you applied, you got in. Nowadays it's like 9%. you know, and the university administration is glorying in the fact that they take so few people, which excludes so many other people from being able to get a quality education. You know, so, you know, maybe we need some help for young men in education. Plus, they're not doing well in public schools. They're percentage-wise, there are more female fighter pilots than there are kindergarten teachers that are men.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it's possible for and half marriages end up in divorce. 85% of cases, kids end up with a single mother rather than with their father. So it is possible for young men to go through their home life, elementary and high school, with hardly any contact with a male mentor, supervisor, you know, or role model. And so, you know, to get men involved, it's one of his things, is get older men involved in the lives of younger men. Is one of his big things as well. And there is this interesting theory, which I'm not sure I'm on board with, but because I haven't quite thought through it. But because boys mature slower than girls do, there's a proposal called redshirting, which means that you start all boys into elementary school when they're 1 year older than the girls do. So if girls start kindergarten at 5, you wait until boys are 6. It will give them a little more maturity in order to do better in academic settings. Like I say, I'm not sure what to think about that, but I understand the rationale behind it, but I don't know if that's really going to work.
I also saw an argument recently that the reason why we have this idea that boys mature slower than girls, it's because our society's become so feminized and the expectations are so feminine. So boys just perform worse at the kinds of tasks that girls are naturally more predisposed to. But it's because we've the system's like, you know, kind of against the guys. So
well, it is,
you know,
and that's obvious in American schools. What's rewarded? Sitting still, raising your hand, keeping on task, being polite. All of the kinds of things that boys have a whole lot of trouble with. But it's true. Girls are reaching puberty at younger and younger ages now. Boys are reaching puberty a couple of years later. And there does seem to be something, you know, look at a high school girl and a high school boy. You know, the girls are much more mature than the boys are. And Scott Galloway, again, just because I've been listening to him lately, I've been trying to glean some of his best information out because I think he's got some stuff that's really good. You know, he says his biggest, of course, he gets into all kinds of trouble with the feminists and the left because, you know, advocating for men is somehow taking something away from women or persons of color or something like that. He says, no, you know, empathy is not a gendered or a race-based thing. We can have compassion for everybody, you know, and acknowledge the real problems that there are. But he says his biggest fans are mothers. And the example he gives, and he says these mothers, they always write to him and say, listen, I got 3 kids. My eldest daughter, you know, is in PR in Chicago. The younger daughter is at Brown University, and my 19-year-old son is laying in the basement vaping and playing video games.
Right.
You know, and it's more than just a meme.
Yeah.
Right.
In my group, so I'm a group leader in the Danish Home Guard, and we have a girl there, and she's like my star soldier in so many ways. She's so driven and focused and like good at everything that we have to do. But then we went out and did like a kind of training session where we took airsoft guns and got to shoot at each other. And then you just see how the guys just like have this natural aggression and this, you know, this they love it, right? And so it falls to the natural. It's like to attack and assault an enemy position. It's just something that they just do, and she just doesn't have that same ability. So maybe she could train it, but you know, it's just like there's no comparison between the male that male ability, and it's not something that comes out through, you know, especially if we're doing like, you know, sitting in the inside and doing exercises and map reading and planning missions and stuff like that as well. Like she has this aptitude of being able to do all these things much better in certain ways. But when you just like as raw soldiering, like killing people, that's what the military is there for. This is what men have done for all of history. That's what we've done.
What are your thoughts on? Is there any benefit for female combat soldiers? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Father Patrick Deacon, Father Deacon Patrick, Brian Mitchell, sorry, his name is. Brian Mitchell. He's actually written 2 books about this subject, and he testified in front of a presidential commission in the United States back in the 90s about the inclusion of females in the armed forces. And actually just did an interview with him on that. And the short answer is no. It's keep women off the front lines. Like, it's terrible idea.
Yeah, and it seems like the countries that are actually serious about the protection of their homelands, like Russia and China, have a totally different disposition about the intermixing of genders and sexes within the military.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, like I saw, again, I don't know how accurate it is, but I saw a headline where the Biden administration was trying to build fighter jet cockpits for pregnant women. I mean, so what type of inverted satanic government would want to put a mother pregnant with a child in a combat fighter pilot situation? That makes zero sense.
With high gravity too, high G's. I don't know.
You couldn't do that.
It beggars the imagination.
Right. Absolutely. And go ahead. Were you getting ready to say something?
I was like, it has to be some kind of like PR thing at the worst, like, because it is always the high status jobs, like here in Denmark, like the medicine, 90% females, law, 95% females. Like, they've totally taken over like all of even the priesthood. Like, if you go and study theology at a university in Denmark, it'll be like 90% females. So we're way past 2 females for every male for most educations. But the very few places where there's still majority of men, like STEM, then they're like running massive campaigns all the time now. So we need to have more women. No one cares about, of course, that there's like garbage collectors and whatever, like high risk jobs are mainly males. But anything that has status attached to it, that's what they're going for. It's a raw.
And that was going to bring up my next point in regards to what are some of the specific attacks that are trying to undermine young men. You mentioned education, and being somebody in academia trying to finish my dissertation. There's not a real place for the masculine virtues that are unique to men within education. I mean, the whole thing is a feminizing process. I know within my own doctoral degree that they don't want you to chastise or criticize other people's opinions. So when you're in a PhD class and you have other students, and if there's a female who might be Muslim and spout something that you think is totally off base, and you try to criticize it, people will be like, especially if you're a white man and you're Christian, well, hey, check your privilege. Like, what are you talking about? That's her truth. And it's like, I thought we're here for academia. I thought we're here for the betterment of ideas. And so education, whether it be elementary, and then you just talk with some of the younger people in Gen Z, they don't know anything about history. They don't know. I don't even know what they teach in school anymore, but it's certainly not anything of importance to make, strong civil citizens. But I saw a recent article that had come out about microplastics, and I think they only tested 23 people, but it was talking about how every man that they tested had microplastics in their testicles. And it highlights the other one of the points I wanted to make in regards to attack on masculinity is the depleting testosterone rates.
Yeah,
I've had Dr. Michael Moeller on, who's a naturopathic doctor who focuses on testosterone, and he can show you the studies that from the 1980s, a 65-year-old man had higher testosterone then at 65 than the average 25-year-old today. And so that is a major function on, I would argue, in regards to the rise of homosexuality and transgenderism and gender confusion, sexual confusion amongst young men, is that they have depleting testosterone rates, relative to somebody who would historically be elderly.
It is. I think it contributes to it. I'm purely personal opinion, but I think a lot of the transgender and confusion, particularly among adolescents, young adolescents, is probably social contagion. Reinforced by social media. That people just jumping on bandwagons. That seems to vanish after a few years' time. Just cool and trendy. But as far as I understand from what people I've been listening to, the decline in testosterone, you're absolutely right. It's like 1% a year for the last 30 or 40 years, but they don't really know why. Granted, xenoestrogens, stuff in plastics, that we're storing our food in.
Right.
I have some small association with a company that makes men's healthcare products. You know, and this is their big selling point. You know, nothing that's not natural that's, you know, is going to, you know, that you're either putting in your mouth or you washing your hair or your skin with, you know, that is going to in any way introduce something that may be that, you know, dangerous to your hormonal.
All these endocrine disruptors that are literally
disruptors. Thank you. That's the word I was grasping for. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, but I think, you know, anything could help. And granted, there are probably things that would help a whole lot more. You know, I remember when I was dieting at one time, you know, my coach said, "Oh yeah, you should use what was it, a cinnamon or turmeric or something like that. It helps with fat loss." You know, I said, "Boss, you know, if I can't even cut my carbs, you know, putting cinnamon on my oatmeal is not going to make a big difference."
Right.
You know, so yeah, I don't know how much some of these, you know, sort of trendy, fashionable sort of answers to these big issues are really helpful, or they're just, you know, sort of grasping at straws. I'm not sure about that.
What are your guys' thoughts? You know, one of the big things, the sort of elephant in the room for young men, is obviously intersexual dynamics. This is why the red pill and the manosphere is so popular right now, because, and we're Orthodox Christians, so the fact that young men are having less sex, premarital sex than ever before, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But what is a bad thing is that the interactions between men and women are, you know, degrading right before our eyes, and how few men are confident enough to go and talk to a woman in person, have a conversation. But then also women, you know, it's hard to find a woman to have a traditional family and life structure with. So I was curious what your guys' thoughts are regarding, you know, the major problem for young men is even if they turn their life around and we're on the same page of much of what we've already talked about, and say they're an Orthodox Christian, say they're somebody who's trying to live a righteous life, finding a wife and finding a woman to build a family with, that is very difficult for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, the approach we generally take is if guys say they're having trouble connecting with women, then we tell them, well, focus connecting with other men, because what improves your sexuality, what improves your masculinity, and makes you more sexually attractive, absolutely, is like connecting with other masculine men and learning from them, being inspired by them. We see that testosterone levels. You just hang out with a bunch of guys, maybe like, you know, do some martial arts with a bunch of guys for an hour. Like your testosterone levels are going to be higher. So some actually read that you just smelling the sweat of other men will raise your testosterone levels as well. So it's like, this is where men, and I'll actually share personally, in my life, for the first 30 so years of my life, all of my best friends were females. So I grew up in a very kind of male-dominated culture, and and competitive, right? So I competed with other guys, and I had to be tough when I was meeting other men. And then when I had problems and issues and challenges, then I felt much more safe sharing it with a woman, and that would be my partner, or, you know, a female friend or something like that. And it fairly late in my life, and through a whole number of things that happened, I was luckily able to understand and receive this gift of realizing like the power of connecting with other men in masculine friendships, and has a very, very different quality to friendships that I had with females. But men have this irritating tendency when you share something you're struggling with, instead of giving you sympathy, then they challenge you, or they try and fix your problem for you. And that's not sometimes what we're looking for. But if we're men that actually want to improve, then it should be what we're looking for, right? And so if we're mature men that actually are open to becoming better, and Christian men who are willing to repent, you know, and realize that we're probably driven by pride and ego and selfishness and things like that, then that's what other men can actually help us with. And when I intentionally create relationships with other men, and this is exactly what we do on Manifesto Core, is we support men in intentionally creating relationships of accountability. So I formulate where it is that I want to get to. I tell people what I want to do, and then I tell them if I've done it or not. and if I have a good friend and I'm repeatedly having to tell them, like, I told you we're going to do this thing, but I haven't done it yet, sooner or later, it's going to be too embarrassing with me. So either it's going to break our relationship, or I'm going to get it fixed.
Yeah. Do you think it's beneficial to be emotive towards women as a man? Because I'm just curious what your personal thoughts are. You mentioned that was kind of your life up to 30, and that for me, that was never the case. But talking with Father Moses, he was talking about that he recommends young men that if you need to be emotive about problems or situation, that's the importance of a spiritual father. And he was talking about with him in his life and the relationship and dynamic he has with his wife, that he wants to be the sort of pillar and stone for women to lean on, and that he really, when he has to be emotive or he really is down and out or depressed about something, he feels like that's the benefit of a spiritual father, is that you can take that to a spiritually inclined man to be more emotive. I'm just curious what your guys' thoughts are about that.
I mean, absolutely. So the model I did for the first 30 years of my life, I see as the wrong way of doing it.
Okay.
Today, so I have a spiritual father who I will get to speak to occasionally and bring problems with, but I also have a daily buddy call with my biological brother. And so if there's anything that's bothering me, keeping up at night, or like that I'm struggling with, I'll just tell him. I'll tell him everything. And he does the same with me. And so that's the right place for me to dealing with those difficult to handle emotions. And I get them sorted out. And then when I go and meet my wife, then I'm feeling much more clear because I've already dealt with that stuff. So I really try and get clarity with my male friends before I bring problems, and I try and solve the problems first. Sometimes I need my wife's input and support with a lot of things, and she appreciates being a part of the process sometimes, but I'm not leaning on her. I want her to be able to lean on me. If I'm sharing with her my difficulties and my, like, I don't know about this, I don't know about that, she's going to be like, well, like, I don't know either. Like, who's in charge here, right? She wants to be able to see my strength, absolutely, and not have to rely on, be the leader in our relationship. Absolutely.
I'll follow up on that as well. I've always maintained that there are issues that it's not best to take to our women. And sometimes when we go to your initial question, should we be emotional in front of our women? If that means, are we supposed to be weepy and sappy and insecure and, seeking validation and that sort of stuff? Right. No. First, it's kind of icky. And second, our women do look on us to be stable and a source of strength and of support. And if we show ourselves weak, their anxiety goes up. It really does. Right. It undermines their sense of safety when we are falling apart. I think what women actually want to know, when we sort of hear and say, oh, if men only wept more or cried more or got in touch with their feelings or whatnot. When I feel my feelings, I know what I'm feeling, and I have a plan to deal with it. And when my wife knows that, okay, I'm upset, or this is really bothering me, or I'm conflicted about something, I can tell her that. But she knows that I'm dealing with it, and then she's at peace. It's not that she wants me to be stoical, and like a cold rock all the time and have no feelings. No, I'm constitutionally, I'm not like that, and that's not really human. And nobody really wants to be that, but neither do we want to be gushingly, emoting, to our women all of the time either. If we've got issues, do we know we have issues? Because the rest of us, everybody around us knows we have issues.
Right.
They really do. Do we know we have issues, and are we dealing with them? Everybody is cool with that. So I think that's really what's underlying the best response to, or do we need to be emotional with our women? Take everything to our spiritual fathers. Thank you. I don't want to hear everything. Honestly,
not everything.
No, but use your spiritual father for those things for which it's appropriate. But as Paul says, have some guy friends.
Yeah.
There are things that other men that we can take to other men that I think is a much better place to take a lot of our issues. And someone who's got a sympathetic ear, but someone also who can call us on our bullshit. If we need that, who can call us out if we need to be called out, who can tell us to shut up, that you're just wasting your time on that. I think that, and if you've got men like that in your life that you can go to regularly, my God, you're golden. You are golden. And ultimately, sort of circle even further back around, one of the things that Scott Galloway mentions, and I think it's a beautiful phrase. He says, "What with for relationships and all, young men. I think 45% of young men have not approached a woman. Between ages of 18 and 25, 45% of those young men have not approached a woman in the last year."
Yeah.
You know, and we're talking about relationships, which ultimately we hope lead to marriages and families, which are the building blocks of society. Okay, but why are women? So why are women? What are they looking for? Economically and emotionally viable men. That's Scott Galloway's phrase, and I think he's right. Economically and emotionally viable.
Mhm.
You know,
They're looking for men who have the potential to lead as well. They're willing to kind of like they want to see the guy's trajectory, and I think a lot of them look at also like if a man who has respect of other men as well, like that's something a woman will sometimes outsource the picking of the guy to the male hierarchy. Male hierarchies are very clear and easy to figure out. Like when you get into a hierarchy, like guys can figure out like who's, you know, there's a bit of storming that happens, and then you know where you're at. And that's what, and women look to guys like, where's he in that male hierarchy? And
Right.
the guy who's high up on there.
It was said of me, I hated it when I was in college and my early years, you know, but I would get from older women, oi, he's a nice boy. He's got potential. You know, but it was true. I was a nice boy and I did have potential. You know, and you're right. And women are willing to bank on that potential. She sees you've got a vision, you've got a direction for your life, you know where you're going, you got your act together, and you know that you're headed for it. You know, that's very attractive.
Right.
I think the thing that I see guys struggling with these days, so many of the guys that are coming in, is stability. They're not able to find stability. And I really like to use the word structure right early on in this conversation, Patrick. Like having a structure that you can put your life around, deciding this is the hill that I'm willing to die on. That it's just that just creates so much power in a man, and people can feel it straight away. It means that when you go into a conversation, you know who you are in that conversation, and you're standing firm on that, and you don't have to, you know, be catering to other people's, you know, whatever it is they get offended about or something like that.
Right. I was actually recently having a conversation with a friend who was talking about some of the dynamics between him and his wife. And I brought up the point that he was frustrated because she would talk about, again, be emotive about situations, her feelings, stuff that happened during the day. And then he would try to give a solution to it. And she wasn't interested in a solution. And it gets back to the point that I made earlier about men being problem solvers from, you know, from the ages of 2 to 4. That's already apparent between the differences of the sexes. And so, like you said, I think this is why it's so important to bounce ideas and problems more so from men, because like you said, if we want to get better, then we need to fix whatever problem emerges. And if anybody's watching and you do have a new girlfriend or you're newly married, you know, realize that this is a difference and allow your woman to emote, because really they just want you to hear it. They just want you to be emotionally supportive, even though it's so frustrating for men sometimes, because they'll say, oh, you know, can you believe she did XYZ? And then you're like, well, just do ABC.
It's helpful, and you as someone who I know is engaged, you know, it is genuinely helpful to ask, do you want me to listen or do you want a solution? You know, because every man assumes that if a woman tells you something, she wants you to fix the problem. And you know, I've been burned enough, and I'm old enough to know now that, you know, that's not always the case. And someone else said that to me. I said, that's absolutely brilliant. Just ask, do you want me just to listen, or do you want me to listen, you know, in man mode and fix it?
Right.
You know, and sometimes they say, no, I just want to complain and get this off my chest. And you can be there and just be emotionally supportive, and that's all they really want. And man, it you know, you don't have to be thinking of the solutions while you're listening. You can even be actually more present and just be there with her. And
right.
Just
want to tell the audience, smash that like. And if you guys have any questions or comments for Paul or Father Michael or myself, feel free to send those in on Streamlabs, Dono Chat, or YouTube. And if you're really feeling generous, you can gift some YouTube memberships. The next point I wanted to come to is I wrote down building confidence, because it seems like, and Paul already kind of hit on this regarding structure, is that a lot of the young men are one of the reasons why, Father Michael, you brought up the inability or the lack of desire to go approach women and talk to women out in public. I think a lot of men struggle with a lack of confidence. And I was curious what your guys' thoughts are on some of the best ways young men can build their confidence. And you know, I do subscribe to the Jocko Willink mantra that discipline equals freedom. And I think that the more disciplined a man can become, that really does give you a sense of confidence. So if it comes to your diet and then your fitness routine or your prayer life and your scripture reading, church attendance, your business, taking care of the things that you have to take care of, that confidence, I've mentioned before, is really about momentum. And we as men have to build momentum in our lives towards our goals and the destinations in which we're going towards. And I've talked with a few young guys doing one-on-ones and in my fitness group, that it's the difficult part for them is getting from zero, no momentum, to just some momentum. And once you get the momentum, you can keep the momentum going. So I open it up to you guys. What are some of the ways in which men can build their confidence and sort of catalyze momentum in their life towards something that's better? Because that gives them a purpose, that gives them energy, it gives them an identity, and it gives them confidence.
Yeah. The simple answer is you stack small wins. You do not begin with confidence. Confidence comes from winning, that you know that you're competent to do something. And so I encourage people, do what Uncle Jordan says and make your bed. Seriously, start small, whatever it is. But you're right. The most difficult part is to begin. And I get that. And so that's what they call the flywheel effect. Once you sort of get the flywheel moving, it's easier to keep it going. But getting it from a stop to a start, that's sometimes we just need grit and grind and a desire to do it, or God forbid, we have to fall so far that we hit rock bottom before we can begin to bounce back up again. But you stack small wins, and that's how you gain confidence. You don't start with confidence. Confidence is the fruit of successful action and of winning. So start winning in very small ways. If you have trouble talking to women, then start talking to everybody. Talk to the old guy behind you at the checkout line at the supermarket. Talk to the gym bro, in the gym who's there. Just start talking. Talk to people from whom you want nothing in return, and just get used to starting conversations with people. And because, if you approach a woman whom you find attractive, already your anxiety is going to go up. But if you're at least comfortable just talking to anybody, it does make it a lot easier.
Right.
Yeah. So small wins.
So if I can build on that, so this is what we do on Manifesto Core, right? Is we have a network of online groups where guys join.
You want to explain, introduce Manifesto Core for people? You referenced it a few times. Maybe some of the people aren't familiar.
Yeah. So this is something we started. I've been running men's retreats and camps and different kinds of events for guys. And then Corona came along. And so I had to kind of decide, okay, am I going to close down my company and stop doing what I'm doing, or we're going to go online? Because before that, I'd not done anything online. So we started running a network of online groups, and that's what Manifesto Core is. So basically, it's accountability groups where you sign up, you have some support in formulating where do I want to go to with my life, what are the actual goals that I want to. We work with quarterly goals, so you set a couple of goals for the next quarter. You'll set 3 goals, and then you'll figure out what do I need to do every single day to move me forward to those goals. What's the one most important thing that will make everything else easier or most important? And you're accountable for that. And so you're in a group where you meet with your group once a week, and there you talk about the goals that you're heading towards, refining that, adjusting it. Obviously, things change as you're going forward. You get cleverer, you figure out more stuff about yourself. But then guys also do daily buddy calls. So I'm leading a group, Father Michael's leading one of these groups, and we have a whole network of groups. All the group leaders meet once a week. And everybody in the groups, you're buddied up with guys for 2 weeks at a time. Then you change to a new buddy. And you're checking in every single day. Did I do the most important thing today? And typically when guys come into these groups, then what they do is they try and transform their entire life in like no time whatsoever. So, they're going to lose 10 kilograms. They're going to, read the 5 books. They're going to, get their finances paid off. They're going to, everything has to change. And what we normally see is these guys will have some success in also no FAP and praying like 3 times a day and everything, right? And we say just start with one thing. What's the one most important thing? And make sure you get a success on that one thing.
What is often the one thing? I would assume there'd be a commonality no matter what the goals are.
There's a couple. I'd say there's like a handful of things that are very common, and then some of them are really, really different. And And normally you change your thing every quarter. So for some guys, one thing I'm seeing a lot recently is like just starting the day with a little bit of journaling, and often making a to-do list, like updating their to-do list. So they know
to-do list is really beneficial.
That's one thing. Some people will make it prayer, daily prayer. That's a absolutely central one. Is getting it's about establishing habits, right? So that's what we're trying to do here. That's why we try and keep one thing for an entire quarter. And we make it a small one, something that you can realize. So you don't say like, I'm going to spend like 2 hours praying every day. Even if I think I want to reach that, then I'll start by saying, okay, I'm going to do like 5 minutes of prayer in the morning, 5 minutes of prayer in the evening at the very least. And if I smash that goal, that's great. The important thing is to get at the end of the quarter and be able to look back and say, wow, I set myself a goal and I did it. I'm going to make a slightly more ambitious goal the next time. And then I can do that. And slowly by that way, I can shift my trajectory to getting bigger and bigger. This is actually an area where I really disagree with Michael Hyatt. He has several books which I've read and appreciated a lot, but he thinks you need to like really just go for this total transformation right from the get-go. And we've tried that, and I've just over years and years and years of doing this, guys, I see it really works. And especially the thing of being in a community. So that's the only thing that I also would add to, for example, the Jocko Willink thing. It's like when you're with a group of guys that are meeting regularly, it has such an incredibly powerful effect in getting you going. That social shaming of being the kind of person who can't actually do what he says he wants to do. It's very, very strong. And so
and the catalyst of the admiration of men that you admire. So if you're in a good group of men, and then you do something that is beyond the average, that they also give praise to or respect. I think men underappreciate how important that is for their lives. And one of the things that I've found talking with just doing one-on-ones with some people is they don't know where to start, because the big one, especially for Christian men who want to have a family, is like, what is your career? What's your skill? And unfortunately, because of the way education and society is structured, men get out of university, or maybe they get a master's degree, and then now they're 26 years old or even in their early 30s. And they're like, oh, crap, my degrees don't really mean anything. I'm having trouble getting a decent job. And they're then struggling, trying to wonder, like, what am I going to do with my life? And I always ask them, like, well, what are you interested in? Because I feel like confidence is tied with, again, that momentum towards an ultimate goal, but a skill is huge. So even if a man who had no skill, that had a great six-pack, was fit, and maybe he was great with women, but he really didn't have an ultimate goal that he's moving towards, I would say that in many ways, he lacks significant momentum that's admired by other men and women. And so trying to figure out, like, what are you interested in? What type of skills do you have? And realize that nothing's going to be given to you. So I talked with one gentleman, and he liked building with his hands, but he was in like an office job. And then eventually he actually got a construction job, and it was difficult, but it created new momentum. And then he had all these skills that he acquired after a year and a half. And now he's getting paid really well, doing something that he actually appreciates. And that confidence allows you to approach a woman, because when she asks, like, what do you do? Like, you have a skill set, you have something that is unique to you. Curious what your guys' thoughts are on that.
Yeah, go for it, Father Michael.
There is an ongoing debate in I guess influencers or men in the personal development sphere as to whether or not you should like pursue your dreams. And I think there's always a place. There's always a place for that. But I don't know if you can make a living off of it. Maybe yes. But I think fundamentally, find something that you can do that will put bread on the table.
Right.
And that's first, because you have to provide for yourself and you have to provide for others. And that doesn't mean to say that you cut out, okay, we always wanted to be a rock musician. Okay. Well, 1% of everyone who wants to be a rock musician actually makes a living at it. Okay.
Right.
But does that mean that you don't buy an electric guitar, you don't buy your Fender amp, you don't sit in the basement and try to play Stairway to Heaven? No, I mean, you do those things, but you make sure that you can put bread on the table.
Right.
First. So I think in some sense, there's a bit of balance that needs to be. We need to honor the things.
Father, what would be your pastoral advice? Say I'm a young man who's coming to you, and I'm in a situation where I'm doing something that I hate to do. I'm working a 9-to-5 job. It's for me soul draining. And maybe I need to figure out a way to put bread on the table. And then you identify like, hey, you're a little overweight. There's a lot of different things that you could probably work on.
Yeah.
What is your advice on somebody where they're almost, I've talked to so many people that are stuck in the rat race and they don't know how to get out of the rat race to create a better situation for themselves where they can provide. Yeah, go ahead.
First step, I tell anybody who feels stuck in a job, polish your resume and get it out there. If somebody else wants you, it's a huge ego boost in the good way. All right. And you have options. And one of the nice things about having options is even if the other options are not as good as your current job, if you can choose to stay in your current job intentionally, you will no longer feel trapped in it. Okay, it's bad, it's not the greatest, but I choose to stay here. You don't feel like a victim anymore, and you will have done something. So the very first thing I say is polish up your resume and put it out there. And if it's something that you want to do in a completely different area, maybe you need to up and move. I've had 2 or 3 guys in my parish who just like up and went off and bought most recent one up and bought a farm, small farm in rural Tennessee. You know, he had been working in he works from home. You know, he does a tech job, but he hated being in greater Detroit area, and he knew he needed a change in life, and he always wanted to live in the country, so he went and did it. Maybe you need to up and move, especially if you've lived your whole life near your parents, near your family, in the same town where everything is familiar. My eldest boy ended up moving over near Philadelphia a couple of years ago, and he said being completely on his own, you know, without, you know, close family and friends around to lean on for support was one of the most liberating things he ever did. It was really scary, but he did it. You know, so maybe a change like that is what's in the cards. And maybe you just need to start a side hustle or go to night school. You know, I confess this myself. After when I got my PhD, about the same year that I defended my dissertation, I have a PhD in church history and patristics. I wanted to teach at university. The same year I defended my dissertation, which was 92, was the year political correctness hit the university. And the job market evaporated in 2 years. Nobody wanted white guys who studied dead white guys, literally. There was nothing to be done. And I had 2 small kids. What am I going to do? I'm never going to teach at university. I had a PhD in my hand, and I went to night school to Lansing Community College, and I studied accounting for 2 years because I needed a job that I could do that would provide for my family. Okay, not exactly my proudest moment. You know, eventually, shortly thereafter, I was called to priesthood and you know, began serving in a parish full time. But I did what I had to do in order to survive and to provide for my own. And, you know, I did it initially. I sort of did it grudgingly, but I knew that I needed to do it. And I did not resent the time that I did it. And I went and I did it faithfully because my family depended on that. And I stepped up.
Do you think you would have been able to step up without the pressure of the familial responsibility?
Maybe not. That's a real good question. Maybe not. How old was I? 32, 33?
I raised that question because the way that a lot of young men are instructed right now, it's like, find your skill, find your career, get yourself in order, get yourself in shape, acquire the money and resources, and then find a woman and get married. And I've also seen this multiple times in other people that that order is kind of flipped. And so maybe they find the right woman at a younger age, they get married, and then it's the pressure and responsibility of stepping up that actually catalyze them to succeed. I was just curious on what your thoughts are on that.
On that, I have heard it said, nothing grows a young man up like a bad marriage and a bad job.
Okay, well, we don't want bad marriage.
Yeah, we don't want bad marriages and we don't want bad jobs. But I have seen it, and there is truth in it. The average age for first marriages in the United States now is 29 and a half. For whatever reasons, but that's it. That's where people get. My boys were both 30 when they got married. I was 24. My mother was 19. So it's sort of a generational thing. People are getting married later for a lot of reasons. So yeah, if you can use your 20s in order to get yourself together, you know, become economically and emotionally viable,
Right.
In Galway's terms. Yeah. And for sure, that doesn't do working out. And Galway actually has 3 things that he says all young men should do. First, get freakishly strong. Join a gym and get strong,
I think
because
that's a good one.
the lessons you learn in the gym are fungible across life.
That's
and
a good
will
one.
serve you well. So first, get freakishly strong. Second, get a job and earn money. He says once you get a taste for what money can do for you, you will always want it and will always pursue a job. Okay. And then third, get in a situation where you are forced to interact with all different kinds of people on a regular basis, so that you learn how to interact with everybody. Meaning, get out of your little bubbles, in your own little isolated social circles, and learn to interact with everybody. And those are fundamental things that will set you up well to do well in life.
What are your thoughts on, the big one in the red pill right now is getting prenups, prenuptial agreements with women in the divorce court, and how marriage is stacked against men right now. And really, they're trying to just be descriptive, but some of them are certainly advising men not to get married at all to deal with the legal situation in the United States. What would be your advice to an Orthodox Christian man recognizing divorce courts, alimony, child support, child custody, all these things that are stacked against men? What is the Orthodox response? Is it still to get married younger if possible?
I don't know that it's and I'll stop here because I feel like I'm starting to dominate the conversation here. I don't want to do that. Maybe there are people who are advocating to get married younger. I'm not seeing the maturity in a lot of young people where I'm comfortable recommending that. On the other hand, I fully recognize, men hit puberty about 13. They're not getting married till they're nearly 30. What are we supposed to do for 17 years when we're at our strongest, where our hormones are at their greatest and everything? I appreciate it's a problem, and I don't have an answer to that. But I don't think getting married at 19 is necessarily the answer.
Okay.
Like I say, what do you do when, as you said, you get out of college with $80,000 worth of debt? Starting, even if you've got a great career, starting salary is not that great. You're still living in your parents' home.
Right.
You're not really set up to take on a wife and responsibilities for kids. It's a vexed problem. And I don't know that I can really generalize about it. But what I've also seen is that as, we get a lot of these 20-something young men in, and I love working with them. And what I find, though, that by the time they're about 30, 31, 32, they figured out some stuff and they begin to get married. The overwhelming majority of them do sort of settle down and figure things out and become attractive to women. And it seems largely to work out. And I think maybe, I don't know how much influence Red Pill has in the broader culture. But I think there's a bit of a self-selected, I forget quite the term for it. And also the willingness, particularly for younger men, because it's an adolescent attitude, not a mature attitude, to take one bad experience and extrapolate it out to everything. I'm sorry, all women are not like that.
Right.
Just because you had a couple of relationships crash and burn. Okay. And maybe the problem's you, bro, and not her.
Right. Paul, you've worked with a lot of young men. What are your thoughts regarding
Well,
this
I think that Father Michael's pointing out something important, which is that just a lot of people have fantasies about what their life to be like, and they're not actually able to handle the realities. And one of the most important realities for a man, as we started off this conversation saying, is that a man needs to be able to provide. He needs to be able to create more value than he consumes himself. And so if you're not doing that, then you're not ready for marriage and you're not ready for that conversation. So you need to get your own life sorted out first as well. And then also you were asking about guys stuck in like kind of dead end or soul sucking jobs. I think also there's like a kind of a glorification of being like independent and free and having no framework and structure. And the truth is that like being an independent entrepreneur is a really, really tough thing. And it's very, very hard. And it's a lot tougher. You have to work a lot harder than what you'd expect. And put your blood, sweat, and tears into something, and there's a whole other set of problems that you haven't even thought about that come in there. So I think that sometimes it's a little bit of a case of the grass is greener on the other side and not being aware of the actual issues out there. And And I also think that, that we are moving to a society which is increasingly making these kinds of things possible. And so sometimes there is an opportunity to connect to, to really find motivation in the long term. You have to really believe in what you're working with. And so the most powerful thing you can do is to start a prayer life and start connecting to God and realize that wherever you're at, that it is actually, it's your work as a man is your ability to discern correct action in whatever sphere of life you're in, whatever relationships you're in. And if you do that well, it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're working in a factory or a YouTuber or, you're a psychologist, whatever it is, you can be bricklaying, then you're going to be faced with difficult decisions and aligning your life with being a godlike man, a God-fearing man. That's the thing that's actually going to create long-term meaning in your life. But right. We work with a lot of guys, so I don't work exclusively with Christians. Manifesto is actually started before I was a Christian as well. So a lot of our members are not Christians as well. And for these guys, like, there has to be an element of following your desires. Ultimately all of our desires towards God, but as in our state that we're in now, then we have a lot of lower desires, and we need to be able to combine these things in a way that's meaningful for us and creates a meaningful life.
Yeah, I think the delaying of marriage is what it can in a way it contributes to the problem of lust that young men struggle with pornography. Because if you're going through your 20s, and if they take the advice of, hey, make sure you build yourself up, you mature, you get in a position where you can actually take care of a good traditional woman and build a family, that creates the next problem that I think is another major attack on men, is lust and being led by female sexual appetite in the hopes of sexual access. So, I mean, I try to avoid as much as I can, and I just refresh my YouTube page, and women scantily dressed are right there to stimulate the senses, and then so it's like we can't avoid it. Every billboard, all the music videos, all forms of entertainment are constantly inflaming lust in young men, and yet we're at the same time trying to help them get their lives together and asking them not to participate in sex or sexual activity throughout their 20s, which has never been the historical case. I remember talking with my priest with my own struggles with pornography and lust, and I was in my early 30s. I am now. I'm 34 and we'll be getting married here in the next few months. And he was like, well, Patrick, his recommendation, and he's 91 years old, is, unfortunately for the contemporary world, young men are not in a traditional situation where they would have a wife. And so this is a very tricky thing that the church has to navigate and try to give advice to young men on, because historically you would have had a wife and you would have been able to women would have been more modest out in public and in society, but you would have been able to have sexual access with your wife in the correct context of a marriage. Well, now, and I'm a perfect example. I'll be getting married at 34, and I lived a pretty debaucherous life throughout my 20s. That would have been very, very difficult to try to abstain from any sort of pornography, no sexual activity, no fornication, and wait till the early 30s to be in a financial and life situation to take care of a wife.
Yeah.
Can I just maybe tell my own story, because I think it'll confirm some of the tendencies that you're talking about actually as well. So I was in that situation that I got married very young. I was 21 years old. I got married to a Danish woman, and part of the reason was to be able to live in Denmark. I was born and grew up in South Africa, had a South African citizenship, and that set me on a path of productivity. My wife also really wanted to have a child, so we were both atheist, agnostic, non-Christians at that time. I grew up Christian but left it, and so also, but I had a structure and a framework, and it just motivated me so much. So my career was like a rocket. I was the environmental sustainability coordinator for 27 countries for Microsoft, basically coordinating between Microsoft's headquarters and a whole range of countries around the world. And it was exactly what I wanted to do. It was the most interesting thing. It was the most exciting. This was, really when climate change was like the big thing, right? And it was coming onto the agenda. And I was working exactly with that thing. I was earning 10 times more money than I could possibly use. And there was a massive hole in my soul. And I was using pornography. and not telling my wife about it. And we were having increasingly big intimacy problems. And so that led to us getting divorced. And after that divorce, you know, my wife used to complain about me working too much. But what we found out actually is that I wasn't that interested in work. It was actually my relationship with her that focused my energy in becoming that provider for the family. And so I started getting into all kinds of weird and wonderful stuff. And I became like the regional coordinator for Burning Man in Denmark and started up a Scandinavian Burning Man festival, which is today massive. And got into Tantra and all these weird stuff and psychedelics and New Age things and who knows what. Lots and lots of crazy stuff that I can talk about.
Been there, done that.
And so my life was just really going to pieces. And in that journey, I had a son because we had a child from our relationship. And actually, I think it was for my 30th birthday. He came me a birthday present, and it was this little thing that you held in your hand and you put it in front of your mouth, and it was this like weird monstrous mouth, and you spoke into it. It had a little microphone, and then it actually like made some kind of weird distorted voice. So it was like some kind of party thing. But he gave that to me, and I was just like, I just somehow realized like, it just hit me like my son is giving this thing that's like this weird, monstrous mouth distorting thing or something like that. And through many conversations of all the weird and wonderful stuff I was getting involved in, I was talking to my son about this stuff. He was just like 7 years old at the time or something like that, right? And it just hit me like I'm really off the tracks. And so in many small little ways, I can realize like my son was this anchor into reality that kind of brought me back to coming back to a place right now. And even my ex-wife in some ways is even though she didn't go as crazy as I did, she's a much more conservative woman. And so having that relationship also, it was like a rock somehow that could bring me back. And I came slowly to realize like, oh, I had given up my belief in God when I moved to Denmark, and I'd given up what was actually, the most important thing in my soul. And so yeah, then at the age of 38, I think it was, I got married again. And then things have, and I've managed to get things back on track again to a certain extent, with God's grace and help and support. And then things are going in the right direction. But it's such a powerful thing to be in that marriage. That marriage is a very, very powerful thing. And I didn't even understand marriage before. I didn't understand it. I just thought it was like some kind of legal agreement that you went into. So now I understand marriage is a sacrament. That's something that blows your mind when you really understand that. Like marriage is this like thing to unite you with God through becoming one flesh with a woman.
Right.
It's something completely else. But even just as a legal commitment in a kind of societal contract, it's an incredibly powerful tool.
Somebody asked a question in regards to the Orthodox perspective on not getting legally married, but only consummating the marriage as a sacramental reality in the church. And this is an attempt by some people in the United States to avoid, again, the court system and all this different stuff. I think there's only a handful of states in which you are able to even do that. And in most states, if you live with the woman that you're going to have a sacramental marriage to for more than 7 years, you are legally married in the eyes of the state. So I'm not sure how beneficial. I believe Alabama is still a state in which you can get religiously married without being legally married.
I think a few states have common law marriage. I know Texas is one of them. If you present as husband and wife, you can be considered husband and wife. I mean, without or live together for 7 years, something like that. That's basically common law marriage. Contrary to what Orthodox boomer grandma says, no, I actually don't need a license from the state to perform a sacrament. But most often they go hand in hand. And the sticky situations are usually with elderly couples who perhaps late in life, widow and widower, who would like to get married, but getting married would so undermine their social security and all that they would not be able to live. And so occasionally ask, could we get married? We love each other. We'd like to be married in the church, but if we get a legal marriage, our support is cut in half and we can't afford to live. Those become very difficult questions. And I'm going to take the coward's way out on this one. That, or it will seem like the coward's way out, but that one is that one goes to my bishop. That's above my pay grade. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a vexing, and it's an interesting thing. You know, personal opinion is I don't have a problem with it, but I know the counter argument then is, oh, are you because there are tax advantages or disadvantages or impacts, there are financial and tax and legal impacts, you know, in not contracting a legal marriage, that I think the priest could be subjected to, and the couple could be subjected to some kind of penalty or lawsuit, you know, from the government for some kind of fraud, perhaps. I mean, I've you know, this is virgin territory for me. I don't really know anything about it, but I could see where there would be issues.
Right. We had a super chat come in. I think this was geared more towards Father Michael, and it comes from when we were talking about men they shouldn't be overly emotive, and he says, Montana Moser, thank you so much for the $10 super chat. Let me pull it up real quick. He says, I remember learning about a hieromonk that would cry on a daily basis, saying it was for his sins. Monastics seem to need to be outside the feelings and behavior, even masculinity. Is this true? And I just want to say off before Father Michael responds is that the gift of tears is a gift of grace from God that, especially for a monastic, is totally different than being overly emotive and emotional like we were talking about. So I don't see the direct correlation here, but I think he's asking for maybe your theological perspective on this.
You kind of stole my thunder. That was the first thing that I was going to say. No, it's perfectly fine, though, because the distinction is valid. Yeah, that spiritual tears and emotional tears are completely different orders from each other, and they're not really to be confused. I don't think that monastics are outside of their feelings, and they're certainly not unmasculine. I mean, feelings are simply human. I mean, you know, being a monk does not mean stoic and somehow suppressing or repressing that part of their personality. I think they simply respond in a more natural way. I know my own spiritual father, the late Archimandrite Roman Braga, may we be worthy of his prayers, you know, was perfectly masculine for an old man, you know, and actually would encourage me, you know, to debate and to fight with people, you know, who had wrong arguments and all. He was willing to step up and be a little pugnacious himself. And he certainly never denied his masculinity. I live near the monastery, Holy Door Mission Monastery, which is a convent of nuns, actually. And they're incredibly feminine, you know, those nuns. They really are. Great strength. And, you know, they embody virtue, what we might call even masculine virtues, but in a very feminine way. And it's a beautiful study, you know, kind of to see that women who are absolutely resolute and just, you know, concretely firm in what they believe and the life that they have chosen, and adherence to the tradition, you know, and their obedience, you know, and the rules of the monastery, you know, they're as strong as any man on that, but in a very feminine way. And so I don't know that I know sometimes it's said, you know, monks aren't really monks, they are angels. And I used to joke that, yeah, Father Roman wasn't really a man, he was an angel. But that's just more to do with their purity of their life. But I don't, because you see, God created us male and female, and how can you know, looking to grow closer to God cannot undermine the natural gifts that he has given to us. You know, human nature is perfected as supernature, as grace is added onto it. So I don't think I don't think it's quite true. I know kind of what you're getting at, but I don't think it's quite true there. You know, and if you can get around monks or nuns and hang out with them a little bit, one of the nice things about it is that I've noticed that as people grow further from the world, their true individuality and their genuine personality begins to flower even more.
Witness that too.
Yeah, you know, so it's you know, it's funny, you know, these little nuns that, you know, that I see over at Holy Door Mission Monastery, they dress exactly the same. They're all swathed in black. They get up at the same time. They pray at the same time. They eat together. They do everything that you would think, oh, absolutely regimented lives that turn them into a bunch of, you know, little, you know, personality-less, unicized kind of, you know, cookie cutter people. And it's not so. They're every one of them absolutely unique and delightful. And
I took my wife to the St. John the Baptist Monastery in the UK before we got married, actually. So while we're just engaged, and it was the most amazing thing to be able to do, spending the time, because there you really get to work alongside and get to know the monks and the nuns very closely, and they spend lots of time. Speaking of which, Father Michael, we should mention that on the 10th of June, you and I are going there, and we still have, I think, at least one place, maybe two, but at least one place available for a pilgrimage there. There's information on Father Michael's website if anyone listening is keen to hear about that. We're going to, it's an amazing monastery in the United Kingdom.
We're leading a small men's retreat there. It's small because the monastery has only so many beds that can accommodate us. So we're limited to a total of 10 participants. I think as we have 8 or 9 right now. So there's a little bit of space. So if someone is interested, you can find me. I'll even just put it in the chat here, just to, the link to my website. You can find some information. I better call it up to the exact page, but yeah, more information will be, information on that is already there.
Yeah, I want to mention as well that so the very first time I had any kind of contact with Orthodoxy, before I even knew what it was, as I visited the St. Catherine's Monastery at the foot of Mount Sinai in Egypt, right by the Red Sea.
Yeah,
I was there when I was 18 years old, and just like this kid out there traveling the world to know what I was up to, and came into this church. This I don't know how this monastery's been there since who knows how long. Muhammad himself actually has given an order that it should be protected. The Muhammad, the founder of Islam. So that's why the explanation why it's managed to be there for all this time. And so I walked into this church, and this massive mountain of a man, a monk, came walking down the aisle swinging the censer. And I really had this impression, like tiny little me meeting something very, very ancient, very, very powerful, and very, very impressive. And I had no idea what it was that year. What back then it was more than 20 years later that I actually found out like what it was. But that moment has stayed with me all of my life. It was such a powerful thing. And just like imagine being a monk living there at the foot of Mount Sinai in Egypt through wars between Israel and Egypt. Monks have been there for thousands of years. They're living the exact same life. They're living under the same rule that they've always lived under. It's such a strong masculine stand to be making, and to dedicate your life to that. When you become a part of a monastery, like you're gonna die there. Like you have like these rows of shelves where all the skulls are of all the people who've been living there before, and there's a place that's like where my skull's gonna be when I die. It's a very, very powerful thing.
One of the next points that I wanted to get your guys' opinion on, because you both of you do so much work with men specifically, is male-only spaces. And it seems like that's on the attack, another attribute that we've kind of discussed throughout this stream, and dwindling. And it seems like in the Western world, they don't allow for male fraternity that's exclusive to men. Very few examples still exist in the West that aren't. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw that the Boy Scouts are now open to all genders and gender expressions. So the ways in which young boys were kind of initiated into nature, survival skills, really useful life skills, and around other boys, around older men. And yes, I'm aware of the pedophilia problems as well. So not endorsing that at all in any way, but Paul, you have a men's only group. Could you guys speak a little bit to the importance of male only spaces? And, luckily being Orthodox Christians, our patriarchy, the clergy is still that, even though there is a subversive attempt to sort of reordain women as female deaconesses, really out of the historical context in which they function, but we'll leave that aside. Could you guys speak to male-only spaces, how that relates or is under attack in the Western world, and some of the things that you guys offer?
Yeah, I mean, there's this drive to make that equality has to mean sameness. And so we have to eradicate all the differences between males and females. But everybody knows if you're a room full of guys and one woman walks into the room, it changes. The atmosphere changes. You can't do the same thing. And especially for young men, and especially if it's an attractive woman. You just don't have that same connection, that same openness. The peacocking starts. There's just like another way. There's another level of complexity in the social interactions that happen. And so there's something about being in a group of guys who are also have a clear and explicit agreement about why they're together. And that's what we have in the Orthodox Church. That's what we work on very explicitly in Manifesto. Like in Manifesto, we're just meeting because we want to help each other to move through the things that are holding us back and be able to progress and develop and build confidence and to realize our goals and to be able to formulate a vision and move towards it. And so it's a very, very powerful thing. This is what the patriarchy is. This is why they hate it so much, is because it's so powerful. That's what, this is what male camaraderie can do. Men can, a small committed group of men can really, really change the world. And it's a very, very powerful thing. But we've become isolated and divided. And so we've actually even lost the ability to recognize positive masculinity in many cases, because there's all of the stories about it are removed. Everything is watered down. Everything is, kind of demonized. But when a group of men come together and do this, just men together, it's a very, very powerful thing. It's a very, very powerful thing. And the moment you put a woman in there, it'll change it. I'm not saying there aren't spaces for mixed gender groups, but we've gone from a state where our entire society was built on gender separated spaces for 90% of people for 95% of the time. It was really the family dinner table where you were together with the whole family. And now we've suddenly moved to, if you're living in a big city and you're working in an office, chances are good that you're with women almost all the time. We have these big events sometimes. We have 140 guys coming, and there'll always be about 5 to 10 guys coming there who say that I've never been in a space just with men before, and it makes me scared. Like a lot of guys feel very nervous about it, and then they'll sit in a circle with the guys, and the guys will start talking about how's your life going? What's happening with your life? And they're always like, oh, these guys are just like me. They're just having the same problems with me. And how about now that we're all here and there's no women to impress, let's try and help each other. And it's just a massive kind of inspiring moment for a lot of men to be able to experience that. And if you haven't experienced that, then I really recommend getting together with a group of guys that have that clear intention. It's a trauma that a lot of men are walking around with.
Yeah. The way I heard it put was, if you have a group of men together and a woman walks in, you can't help playing to the gallery. And it's true. But, likewise, when women get together without the company of men, their language and behavior changes as well.
Right.
And so exclusively female environments are very different than exclusively male environments, and they're wonderful. And I think both men and women need to have those spaces without the other one present, so that you don't have the sexual tension, as Paul says, the peacocking, the trying to show off, and all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
It just changes everything. And I dearly love all male spaces. It's why I work with Manifesto Core. It's why I do men's work. I find it rejuvenating. And again, that's the context in which I can work out issues in my own life that I don't have to take to my woman. Right. And as for the sort of the societal attacks on it, just sort of in a broader context, it seems, I don't know if YouTube will allow me to say this and keep it up, men who are persons who are not women or persons of color, which is a roundabout, backhanded way of saying white men are the only group that are not a recognized class. And so every other group or class is allowed exclusive space. I read on the news now that, we now have racially segregated graduations for some schools or spaces, or they're exclusively women's spaces, or there are spaces for allies of gay, lesbian, transgendered, etc. and whatnot. But the only group that is not allowed or afforded that kind of recognition is white guys, because we're not a recognized group. And should we have them?
And men of European descent.
And men of European descent, yeah. So should we have them? I don't know. That becomes a little delicate to me, because we sort of, on the one hand, we ought to be able to hang with who we want to hang with, and if we if it's no girls allowed, then to a degree we ought to be able to say that. But on the other hand, it sort of almost seems like a kind of whining. Well, I want to be a victim too. Why don't we get spaces like everybody else? And I don't want men to become another accredited victim class. And I think it's part of what makes working with men and men's rights, even in society, a little more difficult, because at least for those of us who tend to be a little more macho, right, masculine, traditional, we don't want to be a victim, and we want to handle things on our own, and we want to have agency in our own life, and we don't want a government handout or another set aside, you know, or some kind of program, you know, to give us a leg up. You know, so yeah, it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to do. It's very complicated. And dealing with it, I mean, it's easy to sort of reduce it to like, oh, it's only this, it's one element, you know, and that's it. And I think the situation is polyvalent. It's much more complicated than I don't have ready solutions. I don't think it admits easy answers to it.
Well, and that leads into another point that I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are. But I posted a clip video or a YouTube short one time talking about red pill and manosphere types are very individualistic. And they always talk about men's rights. And that leads into, I want to talk to you about duties versus rights here in just a moment.
Yeah.
But I asked, you know, what patriarchy do you guys belong to? Like, what historical lineage are you guys belonging to? Because if we're talking about male identity, how can you divorce the concept of ancestors and patriarchs, and not just within the church, but within your own family lineage as for identity? And I think for some of the young men today is they have no identity, and they're really not allowed to have a sort of identity. And the church and the patriarchal structure at least affords some type of masculine identity that's structured in an institution. But what are your kind of thoughts on that?
And it has some, I mean, it has some historical continuity as well. You know, I think that's part of it. And I think part of what's hardwired into us as humans, I don't think it's exclusively a male or a female thing. But, you know, as it says in the scriptures, you know, may you see your children's children. You know, it's not just that we have concern for our own selves. And I've come to appreciate this as my own boys are getting ready to, you know, start their own families. You know, it finally struck me in the Psalms, may you see your children's children. Why? Because there's actually something kind of hardwired in us. We're not just concerned for our own offspring's success and viability in life, but we want them to succeed enough for them to reproduce.
Right.
And concern, I think masculine concern, parental concern is probably parental concern. I don't know if it's exclusively masculine, but parental concern to see that our children flourish enough to where they are able to reproduce and have children of their own, I think is a big thing. And that's part of my identity now. And, you know, I look, maybe next year I will get to be grandpa, you know, and I'm ready for that, you know, and there's an identity and a care and a concern that's not just spatial for people around me, you know, that I'm responsible for my wife, for my congregation, you know, maybe my friends or immediate family, but I have responsibilities for generations yet to come.
Right.
And, you know, when you start thinking in those terms, it really is an additional dimension.
Yeah, it gives you a historical context and situation of you within space and time. You know, if you have some type of identity, and I partly think this is why immigrant groups do so much better in America. There's multiple factors potentially to that, but the average American is so fat, lethargic, you know, disengaged, propagandized towards, and then they have no real identity. And even what it meant to be an American, what American identity was, is totally destroyed.
Yeah, multicultural.
So I haven't been listening to a lot of Alexander Dugin, but I did actually listen to one video recently of him speaking.
The interview with Tucker Carlson.
I think that was it. Yeah. So this idea really struck me as very obviously true, that the liberal project has its goal of liberating us from all collective identities. And so identity is incredibly important, that we have multi-leveled identities. Jonathan Peugeot talks a lot about this, right? And I really love that like universal history project that he has with Richard Rowland of like understanding how our identity is really connected and embedded in so many different layers and areas of life, even, you know, especially as Christians. But that, you know, that liberalism has first liberated us from, you know, fascism and communism, but then it's gone to work to liberate from every single other, well, at least in the political sphere, as far as the labels are concerned, obviously these underlying tendencies come out, you know. So as a political ideology, you can't call yourself a communist anymore. But neo-communism or neo-Marxism is, of course, just as large. When I studied at Columbia University, then Marx was the #1 theorist that we were presented with and asked about and trained with and indoctrinated with all the time. his historical materialism
now
is everywhere.
The number one cited scholar within liberal arts is Michel Foucault, who was a radical leftist progressive and pedophile who died of AIDS because of his sexual extravaganzas in bathhouses in San Francisco while he was at Berkeley. And so it's kind of symbolic of the contemporary period when that is the person that has the most citations in the liberal arts. It kind of points to where we're headed and where we're at, really. Not where we're headed, but where we're at.
Where we're at. There may be some. I'm mildly hopeful. I mean, we begin to see signs of hope, and that this pendulum will swing back a little bit. So,
but that hope is related to generations, right? So this has been my point in regards to Orthodox Christians is like, if we want to change culture, it's not going to happen in our lifetime. We can contribute to that pendulum swing, but it's about our children's and our children's children, and the hopefulness. And this is where, I think that the manosphere and the red pill doesn't focus on. Much of their prescriptions is sort of accommodating to the contemporary situation of promiscuous girls, hypergamy, all this different stuff, right? That is laid out.
It's very selfish, focused on what can I get out of my life right now, kind of thing. It's
right, but the point is, if we're actually rooted within tradition and want to change, it's a generational warfare, and the goal is to have children and have babies. And this is what I think is really hopeful about Orthodoxy in America is birth rates and the amount of children we have. Orthodox and traditional Catholics have arguably the highest birth rates amongst Christians in the United States. And so that means we're going to win in the end. It's just, we're not going to be there.
Yeah. The future belongs to those who show up for it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and one of the things which I find, always, mildly off-putting about the discussions with red pill and such not, is that there is always kind of a pessimism that seems to linger in the air whenever, their attitudes and whatnot come up. Look, we are Christian men. The battle is won. Christ is risen. Death has already been defeated.
Right.
And so, I mean, even, if you're going to be a culture warrior, do it with a smile on your face and a song in your heart, and quit grousing about all that's wrong in the world, and find some of the beauty and lift that up as well. Like I say, there's just sort of the hopefulness that's there. So just, if we remember that and let that be part of the cornerstone, our faith in Christ, that's already, he's already won, and we win in the end, for sure. So we can have a little compassion for ourselves, and maybe even just a little bit for the poor deluded souls that we have to contend with, sometimes. I don't think it would hurt us if we did.
Right. I just want to give a appreciation to Jay Dyer, who rated the chat, sent a bunch of the people that were watching him over here. So thank you, Jay, for that. Really appreciate it, my friend. And if you guys watching want to support or have any questions or comments, feel free to send those in on Streamlabs, Dono Chat, or YouTube. Anything related, hopefully, to the topic. And if it's theologically oriented around orthodoxy, Father Michael would probably be able to give us a voice of reason regarding whatever question you may have.
I hope that would be nice if I can give a voice of reason about something. Yeah.
So the next point that I want to bring up is, how is traditional masculinity beneficial for women? Because this is something that Father Turbo has spoke about, and he even mentioned it in a stream that I did with him, that when we look at this progressive ideology and transgenderism and this sort of dissolution of boundaries and everything, the people that are actually hurt the most by it is women and children, which we're seeing with the sexualization of children. We're seeing the idea that they can choose their gender by the age of 3. They already have a sexual disposition. We've seen people identify as MAPS, minor attracted persons, talking about, children as young as 8 can sexually consent. And then we have all these men within female sports and female spaces, men going to female prisons and then raping various women, getting them impregnated. Could you speak a little bit to, because we've talked a lot about masculinity and many of the ways in which they are being undermined in Western society. How is men stepping up to their masculine role beneficial for women and children?
Mm-hmm. Maybe I can use my personal life to get a start on that as well, because that's probably a good example. So when I met my present wife, then I was running a large camp at the Scandinavian Burning Man event called the Borderlands, was involved in all kinds of stuff, which was not at all conducive to creating a stable, safe environment for a family whatsoever. And when when I then met my wife, we had an incredibly good effect on each other. We met each other in that environment, actually, but we had an incredibly good effect. There's something that happened, and I tell her it's because she trusted me. She trusted me in a way that I don't think other women did. So suddenly I realized I didn't have to try and convince her about something, because she just automatically trusted me. So I became aware of the responsibility that was on my shoulders. And I think what's needed is for men to become aware of the responsibility that is on their shoulders to actually lead a family, because that's what we need. And so today we live on a homestead out in the countryside. We have two sons here with us. And she doesn't work anymore. She's been a gender studies major at university, done all kinds of weird and wonderful stuff, lived all over many different countries. But today she will tell you that the most amazing thing that she gets to do is to spend every single day at home with our children, looking after them. And she knows that I'm earning the money for the family and providing. And so she can make our home beautiful. And so we have a 360-year-old house that we're bought and that we're developing and fixing up, and we have 14 sheep, and I'm busy building the hen house at the moment. And so it's just such a different life that we have.
That's not where she hangs out with her friends, right?
Yeah, sorry.
Nothing. I was making
the hen house.
I can't speak too harshly against chickens. Though my latest catechumen has chickens, and I was rewarded for enrolling her as a catechumen with 24 fresh eggs. So I'm all for other people having chickens.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like, and she had to take a lot of flack for that, living here in Denmark and in some circles. But I think everybody gets it now. People, her whole family, and everybody who's any contact with her, they can just see how she's thriving in like such an amazing way, being able to just live a far more traditional life, where we have an explicit understanding between the two of us that our life is built on a biblical understanding of what it means to be a man and a wife. It's just been so powerful for our lives, transformative, utterly.
When you were speaking, it reminded me of the recent speech by the punter of the Kansas City Chiefs, Harrison Butker, who's a traditional Latin Mass Catholic, and he gave a commencement speech at the Benedictine College, I think, in Missouri. And I know you're outside the United States, Paul. You may have seen it. Father Michael may have already seen this, I'm sure. But there's huge outrage because he congratulated the students on their graduation, and then highlighted that he said, I'm sure for many of you young women, the biggest thing that you're excited about is to be a mother, a wife, and a homemaker. And this got so much backlash in the United States for him being misogynistic. I mean, even the NFL came out and condemned his words. And I saw Roger Goodell, I believe today or yesterday, put out something and try to pull back the NFL's sort of distancing between Harrison Butker's statements, because I mean, look at the NFL. We have people that, for example, just within the Kansas City Chiefs, Rashee Rice, who's like a wide receiver for them, was speeding on the highway in Texas, smashed into a woman and her child in their car. Luckily, they were hurt, but they weren't killed. Had guns on them, then got arrested for something else. He has multiple warrants for his arrest, and the NFL doesn't say anything. And then a guy has a traditional Catholic opinion on gender roles, transgenderism, homosexuality, all these things that we've already discussed in society. And the NFL has to immediately come out and condemn it. It just shows you the kind of state of the world that we're in. But Father Michael, I'm curious what your thoughts are on how masculinity is beneficial for women and creating these gender or sexual roles and maintaining them. Really, it liberates women, even though they think feminism has taught liberation is actually just working for your boss.
Yeah, that has always struck me as odd, even before I saw some people memeing about it, that somehow, working in your home and taking care of your children is slavery, but 40 or 50 hours a week in a cubicle working for a boss is somehow freedom. And that never quite made sense to me. but I think, sort of traditional gender roles for men, I mean, like what I said, just so we sort of broadly or loosely understand as procreate, protect, provide, and preside, especially with the notion of protection. I think that's largely where that and providing is largely where the benefit of men to women is there. I understand even nowadays one of the problems that very successful women are having is that there seems to be some truth to the hypergamy claim that women date and marry horizontally and up, and when you've got a woman who's in the top 5%, say, in her field, making really good money and has a position of great authority and responsibility, she wants a man who makes even more money and has even more status and responsibility. She's already at the top, and the pickings are slim up there. So there seems to be some sense that, what do we call it, an instinct, I guess, that women still desire something from men, that men are still required to provide for them. So if men can provide well for their wives and their families, women will benefit. Women do also socialize men, to a large degree. And tell me, guys, a lot of what we do for our women. And it's true, and I do the same thing, and I have no shame about that. So I have been domesticated to a large degree, because I want to, I want to please and to serve my wife in an appropriate way, protecting them not only physically, but emotionally and all. Men, are we get laughed at because men are so jealous and all. No, we care for the people in our care. We're very concerned for the welfare of our wives, for our children, our property, our pets, our jobs, any realm of responsibility for which a man has. He's very concerned for its well-being and its promotion and its goodness and its flourishing. And this is hardwired into us. And if women appreciate that, to know what a man will do in order to protect and to provide for her, I think she would be pleased, to find a man who is willing to do that. And the thing is, men will do it gladly. Like I said, I went to night school to study accounting. To do that, Paul is not making the money that he made that he did when he worked for Microsoft. But he is a happier man, and he can sleep with his conscience at night. Right. And he provides for his wife. And I've been to his home. I've actually stayed with him. Yeah, it is 350 years old. It has a thatched roof, and at the time, even a ferret living in the attic. So it's very traditional, there in the Danish countryside. And I found it was large but quaint, but he cares for it, and that gives him a sense of responsibility, and he takes pride in what he's got, and rightly so, And so I think, there are real benefits to, if you will, sort of traditional gender roles, but women benefit when men act like men. Right. And likewise, men benefit when women are feminine.
And that leads to, I saw some comments in the chat about authority. And I was wondering if you guys could speak, especially Paul, you've been married, you have children, Father Michael, obviously the same. But there is this idea that if we're both Orthodox Christians or we're both traditional Christians, well, then once we get married, I have authority. I'm the man. I make the decisions. And at the same time, I've seen with my own eyes contexts where I talked with some people, and I could see why they're having troubles having authority in the marriage dynamic, that they're not stepping up to the leadership role that they're called to. Could you speak to a little bit about this? That yes, our theology and our church has informed us the dynamic that a marriage should exist in. And yes, men should have a sort of authority within the house, but you also have to earn that to some degree. I don't want to make it sound like it's, this thing that has to be bartered with, and you have to achieve certain circumstances. Like you have to make so much money, or you have to be so fit, or you have to be, so successful for a woman to do this. That's not how we understand it. But could you speak to what authority means in a healthy marriage dynamic as Orthodox Christians?
I think I should defer to Father Michael on this one to get us started, because definitely the extra 40 years of experience weighs heavy on this one.
You're a coward. I was hoping you would start for the same reason. There is, there is a difference between authority and domination. And authority is loving. And I mean, I've always involved my wife in major decisions. Actually, I think I read one time was it Red Pill Theory somewhere about the, captain and first officer kind of dynamic, which I think seems to work. At least that's sort of the way my wife and I work. I don't make a major decision without consulting her, and getting her wisdom and her input on it. There are things which she's much better at. From the time we were married, she's kept the checkbook and paid the bills, which some would say, oh my God, men shouldn't have control of the money. But she's much more responsible about that than I am. I mean, when I was a teenager and young, I wanted to be a monk. I never highly valued money. Look, if I wanted to be rich, I wouldn't be a priest, right? Okay, so money may not be the most important thing to me, to this day. But she has a Bachelor of Science degree. She's very good with facts and figures and all. And said, please take care of it because my checkbook was a mess. So we have our proper domains, and we've worked that out over time. There are things she does, there are things I do. She comes to me and to discuss major things, but we've been together long enough to where we by and large agree on most things. There's very little disagreement left with us. And the man is the head, the wife is the neck, and what's the part that turns the head? That's sort of the rest of that quotation. Yeah, I know. But it doesn't have to be a dominating thing. And I think, really mutual respect and deep love, go a long way. I mean, I would not do anything willingly to offend my wife. I mean, it's just, that genuine fear, in there, and that's a healthy kind of fear too. God forbid I should ever do anything like that. So if it affects her, we talk about it. Ultimately, though, we'll come down on decisions, and sometimes I need to make a decision. If we're ambivalent, I'll sort of step up and say, okay, I'll take the rap for this one if it blows up in our faces. But I've not found it to be an issue, and I guess maybe because my wife is rather feminine, and I tend to be a little more masculine, and so there is a kind of deference that she has, and it's a subtle thing. It's not like anyone would look at the two of us together and say, oh, she's some kind of cowering subservient thing like this, or I'm some sort of dominant, have my woman under my thumb thing. That's not us at all. But we've been happily married now for going on 39 years. We managed to raise our children well. So it works. I think sometimes out of fear we want to wield authority heavily in order to defend ourselves. And I think once you're confident in who you are and in your relationship, authority is always best held very lightly, rarely used. Sort of like a lot of what things that we say of masculinity, men should be very strong. What was that line from Jordan Peterson? We should be monsters, but have that under control, not wimpy and all. Or I can't quote him exactly.
That's the only way you can have mercy.
It's the only way you can have mercy.
You can only be merciful if you actually wield something of power over somebody else that you choose not to utilize.
Yeah. But you need to have it, but rarely use it. I suppose that's it.
Right.
And so I found that's very well, and always like to hold these things lightly and be very careful of getting your ego in the way, because that'll spoil things quicker than anything.
Yeah. So, I mean, my marriage is a different generation, I think, than Father Michael's. I also am blessed to have parents that I've never seen argue. I asked them, how do you guys, why have I never seen you argue? They say, well, we don't argue. Like it's not really much we disagree about anymore either. But that's not the case with me and my wife. I think we got married in our late 30s. So we had already got very used to having things our own way in many ways. And we're probably also more impacted by the culture. And so I got married very much with this idea that you just mentioned, Patrick. Like, it's like, I'm the man, and there's some things like when it's important, when we get to like a boundary, I need to be able to like put down the law kind of thing, right? And I've realized like it has to be tempered with so much love, and I also need to be very careful of my own ego. And I still also need to be able to stand firm. It's so important that I can stand firm. The biggest temptation for me is to avoid conflict, let my wife decide. because she's a very dominating person in many ways as well. At least her family will tell you that. And she's a very strong-minded woman and a very independent woman. And she's been told ever since she was a tiny little girl that the most important thing is that she becomes a strong and independent woman. That's what we tell our girls these days. We tell boys that they need to be soft and crying and all these kinds of things, right? So I need to. My wife loses respect for me if I'm not able to figure out things for myself, at least in the areas of my expertise and my responsibility, and then be able to stand firm. But I have to be so careful of becoming emotionally reactive as well, because if I get emotionally reactive in those conversations, then things can really go bad. So and I need to carry a heavier burden. Like I'm here to serve. So it's not about me. It's not about my wants. It's about what's good for our family, and I need to constantly help her to understand how that is what I'm working for. Right. And so it's about building trust, because one argument, one kind of something that goes wrong, it can break down a lot of hard work. So you need to put in a lot of good work. But for us, certainly, I can also see that when we have some kind of disagreement, I'm able to stand firm. Sometimes there's emotion that comes from her, and I have to be able to handle that, but be able to guide her through that. And sometimes it takes a long time, and very often it's then confirmed by an elder in the church. Right. There was one thing, for example, I think it's okay for me to talk about this. Like, she was studying theology when we met, and for various reasons, I said to her, I think you need to stop your theology studies. And she got very upset about that, about my wanting her to stop studying theology at Copenhagen University. So at the Copenhagen University. And then we went to this monastery in Essex. This was before we got married. And Father Zacharias there said to her, you need to stop studying theology and instead support Paul studying theology. and then she just went home and changed it in 1 second whatsoever, right? So having something higher than yourself that you can draw on is absolutely essential.
Right. I know, Father Michael, you got to go here in the next few minutes. So if I had my last point that I wanted to get your perspective on, if you just have a moment, is we've talked a lot about the ailings of young men, the problems that they face, but we haven't talked about women. And so I wanted you, if possible, because I know you got to leave, so whatever time you have. Obviously, men are facing a situation in which women are much more promiscuous, much more leaning towards antinatalist understandings of family, and elevate the pursuit of a career over the construction of a family. Could you speak a little bit to where women could do better, especially young women, and how young men who are Christian and do want to have all the things that we've mentioned and discussed for the last 2 hours, how do they go about finding a good woman?
Yeah, the women, the problems that young women are facing, I think when I look at studies, I do tend to spend almost all of my time working on men because it's my specialty. It's sort of my side hustle, and it's a primary interest of mine. The statistics for women are as devastating in their own way, and the rise of suicide just in the last. No, I'm not going to give a temporal barrier because I don't want to. I want to preserve a little more anonymity. I will say this: the number of young women that I've known that are suffering severely enough from depression and anxiety that it has interfered with their lives or their schooling. I did not see that before about 6 or 8 years ago, maybe 9, 10 years ago. It's become all too common now. Mm-hmm. Teenage girls who can't function because of anxiety. This is
in addition to it, women that are reaching their 30s who maybe lived a more promiscuous secular life in their 20s, even within the Orthodox Church. Many clergy have come on and said that they are having to pastorally lead women who maybe they're trying to change their lives around in the 30s, and they're realizing that maybe their maternal window is shortening.
Yeah, and that does seem to be the case. Sort of the party years in the 20s seems to be sort of a cultural thing. Yeah, it's unfortunate, and there is a galloping promiscuity which seems to, not everyone, but it is a large thing. So okay, yeah, they have issues. Practical things to do. one of the things that I feel most sensitive about is that just like porn is the addiction for young men, social media is the addiction for young women. The constant, they post a picture. Oh, you're so lovely. You're so beautiful. Oh, that's so attractive. Oh, you're such a nice looking young girl, and whatnot, becomes a kind of emotional validation that they're very drawn to. I don't know that women, especially younger women, hold their opinions maybe as strongly as young men do. Women are much more sensitive to following social norms and fear of ostracizing, sort of the mean girls meme that you get, in junior high or high school. There does seem to be some truth behind that. And so women will go along to get along, because they're just more sensitive to those sorts of things. And, once they sort of get out of the context where those things are promoted, they didn't hold on to them so much. That was just the thing that they said. It's cool to be bisexual now, or pansexual, or God, what is it? I have a therapist in my, a psychologist in my congregation. He says he's come across this sort of stuff in his practice. A 9-year-old, 11-year-old girl who says she's a pansexual. Well, what is a pansexual? And she gives like a dictionary definition of it. Well, have you ever held anybody's hand? No. Have you ever kissed anybody? No. Well, what do you mean you're a pansexual? It's just cool and in and the sort of the thing to do. So I think a lot of those sort of things probably will go away with a little bit of maturity and patience and time. And, I found that in pastoral work, a great deal of patience, and generally takes care of a lot of problems. Where women, where do you find, good quality women? Please let me know. I've got a couple of dozen, 20-something young men in my parish that would dearly love to find a fine young woman to marry right now. I believe they're out there. And I think part of the situation is, as I said, average age for marriage in America now is 29 and a half. And I think for some guys, they're just not economically and emotionally viable enough to deserve a woman. And when they get a little bit older, I think they'll find the search a little bit easier. So I just kind of encourage a little patience, not to lose hope, certainly not to become bitter because of frustration or a few bad experiences, and certainly don't extrapolate that all women are evil and marriage is impossible and I'll never find anybody. That this tendency to absolutize and to catastrophize out of our own experience is not a helpful thing to do. So again, to be cautiously hopeful and to do what you can, that because the only variable in any relationship that you absolutely can control is yourself. So you make yourself the best man that you can possibly be, the best candidate that you can possibly be, and women will recognize the value that's there. So be encouraged on that and continue to work on yourself. And yes, that includes keeping Christ as the cornerstone and the foundation of everything that we do. Live your life according to the gospel. Absolutely. Do not compromise on your values, and be an upright and upstanding man. But having said that, go out there and work hard, get a good job, build your physique, do all of the kinds of things that we all sort of know that men need to do in order to optimize their lives. You'll do that. I'm hopeful. I think in time you'll probably find what you're looking for. But prepare yourself for it now and don't waste time.
Right.
Fair. Is that fair? Yeah. Forgive me.
Maybe I know you got to leave, so I'll let you get out of here. The second part was young men or men in general in the church, older women in their 30s or maybe later 30s are coming into the church and they're like, oh, well, I don't want to be with them. I want to have a family. Yeah. And so there's a preeminent desire to get with young, fertile women, but there's only so many of those to go around. And so there has to be some grace that needs to be dealt with, because the red pill, the manosphere, these 304s, these girls are whores. They've had all these promiscuous sex. Their body counts are high. Therefore, they mock traditional Christians, saying, oh, yeah, just wife up the 304, because as soon as they convert, recently an OnlyFans girl became Christian and everybody's like, oh, how wonderful this is. And so there needs to be a line between giving grace to so many people that have lived debaucherous lives, myself included, and come to the church. Fortunately, I was a man, so that time wasn't as of the essence as it is for women. But also you know, not just getting with somebody just because they're a Christian, and that we all need to make sure that whoever we marry is strong in their faith and has changed their dispositions.
Yeah, repentance is a thing, you know, and we believe in it. And people do change. I have seen evidence of it in my own life, and evidence of it in every congregation that I have ever pastored. And it is a real thing. So people do change. And yes, women do grow up and realize that, in point of fact, no, party girl isn't what I want to be. I really want to be a mom. And yeah, I mean, okay, you got your standards, guys. I appreciate that. That's a hard one to answer. Maybe, you know, if you want, you know, the single or unmarried or, you know, virgin trad wife, unvaxxed. Yeah, I saw that.
That was a big one.
Okay, yeah, maybe she lives in the one lives in rural Manitoba or something like that. But and good luck finding her. I'm not saying settle, but I am saying do be willing to broaden your horizons. You know, and maybe your potential wife is not in your local Orthodox parish. I found a nice Catholic girl and converted her. You know,
there you go.
You know, there are, you know, there are other options out there. But again, don't lose faith. Keep hope, and be a little upbeat about it, and go out looking for a wife, as I say, with a smile on your face and a song in your heart. Because if nothing else, you know, the hopeful attitude is very attractive on a man. Right. And the dour, bitter, angry, resentful, black-pilled attitude ain't going to get you anywhere in life. So ditch that. It's not serving you well.
Right.
Right. Fair enough. Forgive me. This has been really great. I've enjoyed every minute of it. It's always good to talk to you, Patrick. And Paul and I, you know, we talk together often. We always have fantastic conversations. I have deep respect, you know, for what both of you do. And yeah, please, you know, let Paul speak a little bit more about the good work that he's doing in Manifesto Core, because that's we found that to be genuinely beneficial to men and their development, helping them to become the best men that they can be. It's a marvelous tool. So I commend it, you know, to any man who's looking, you know, for good male companionship and accountability and help with working out a vision and a direction for his life and getting good support to move forward on that. All right. Thank you too much. Forgive me if in anything I have given offense. That's not my intention to do so.
No.
And as I say, forgive me. I have other obligations I need to tend to. So
all good. Thank you for being here. We appreciate you. God bless you and your family, Father Michael.
Thank you. And Christ is risen, guys.
Truly he is risen. Truly is risen. Thank you. Paul, yeah, would you like to speak more about everything that Manifesto Core does? You've mentioned it throughout the conversation, but just speak more specifically. And I think you have something to offer for everybody watching tonight who'd be interested.
Yeah, so we follow a really simple process where we help people when they get in to figure out what it is they want to go to. We call it a vision. So it's like where it is that you want to head to in your future. Based on that, you then set a couple of goals. And then you try work on what are you going to do every single day to move towards that goal. And so you're put in a group of guys, which is your accountability group. And that group of men then meet once a week and they talk about their vision, their goals, their habits that they're working on. So they're trying to embed new habits in their life that are leading to this trajectory change that they're trying to make. And then you're buddied up with one man at a time for 2 weeks at a time. Where you have daily buddy calls with another guy. And normally those daily buddy calls are, you know, we have a working procedure of how to do a buddy call, and the standard buddy call is like 2 to 3 minutes. So it's basically just checking in, like, did you do your most important thing today? But depending on who it is you're doing it with, and as guys get to know each other, they often find that there's a need for having deeper conversations and reflections. Personally, I've been doing daily buddy calls for about 6 years now, and every time that there's something that's bothering me, I talk to my buddy about it, and he's heard my bullshit a lot, so he calls me on it as well. And so if I'm cutting corners, if I'm, you know, still stuck in the same ruts that I've been in, then he's going to be able to call me out on that. And so we actively and intentionally set an agenda of trying to lift each other up, challenge each other, and inspire each other. And so there's a different range of different groups, and people come in and we have an onboarding process, and then you go and apply for a group. And so you get to visit the different groups, and you don't just get placed in one, but you pick a group that you feel suits you, and they have to decide that you suit them as well. They don't have to accept you either. So it's kind of like an application process, and that's the way it is. And so when guys come in, either one of two things happens. Either people find out that, well, most people find out it's pretty difficult to do what you say you're going to do. This thing of like being a man of your word, it's something that we can aspire to, but all of us fail in it sometimes because life happens, and we're used to cutting corners. We live in a society which enables us to be able to cut corners and to not actually be truthful with ourselves. And so Manifesto is a very strong counterweight to that. It's really based on becoming the kind of man who can stand amongst other men and say, this is what I'm going to do, and then be held to account to actually go and do that. And so we try and move forward. And as we do that, we learn more about ourselves, and we learn about what we actually want to be doing and how we want to be moving forward. And so we support each other in that journey. So some people, they will come in and they'll try this and they'll fail, and try this and they'll fail, and either they'll make it work and they'll start getting more real with themselves. And in that case, most of the people that come in, they stay for a pretty long time. They stay for years. And other people, they can't handle that. And so then it normally takes about 3 to 6 months for people to realize, like, I just can't do this. Some people already right from the get-go, from the first meeting. But we do offer a 3-month, 100% money-back guarantee for anybody who's interested in joining Manifesto course. So if you join and you do it for 3 months and you find you don't like it, you get all of your money back. And for people listening to this live stream, we're also giving now a 30% 4-month discount to make it even cheaper. It costs about $65, I think, per month as a subscription that you pay to join. And so if you sign up using the coupon code COTEL, Church of the Eternal Logos, COTEL, then you'll get a 30% discount for the first 4 months that you're on core. And again, the 100% money back guarantee is also applicable. If you don't find it's valuable for you for any reason, then no questions asked. We'll be happy to refund you. It's very seldom that people do that. Most people find it gives them a really good support. Especially useful for people who are kind of going into some kind of transition. Maybe you're becoming a father, maybe you're going to a new job, wanting to step up as a leader, maybe you just broke up in a relationship, something like that. And that's why we find a lot of people come into Manifesto Core. That's the people who find useful. But just generally anybody who wants to be held more accountable. You know, it's like we all have read Jocko Willink and we think, yeah, like radical ownership and all this kind of stuff, extreme ownership. But what we found is that we're not isolated individuals. And so being in a group of men who are supporting each other explicitly with a culture of doing this just makes things a lot easier to be able to move forward. So it really helps a lot to be in that social setting. And yeah, we've been doing it for quite some years now. We have a lot of in-person events. Most of our groups meet up. At least they have to meet up with some of the men on their group once a year if they stay in the group for over a year. So it's something that people find valuable and useful. And it's easier to talk about this difficulties in your life with a group of guys that you don't know, actually. You're all there for the same reason. And so some people also find it really to be a massive relief to be able to come in and just be able to share freely with other men, where you realize, like, oh yeah, most guys are probably just dealing with the same kind of problems that I have myself. So that's Manifesto Core. That's our online offering. Father Michael and I are organizing a pilgrimage to the United Kingdom. There's a monastery, St. John the Baptist Monastery of Essex, where there's an elder Zacharias there, a fantastic elder. If he's not a living saint, then he's pretty damn close, and from a very good lineage. And it's also a monastery where you can really, they have a lot of monks and nuns, and you can live and work alongside them. So we'll be staying there for a full week here in June. So I think Father Michael shared the link in the chat. I'd be happy to put it in somewhere as well. And that's worthwhile checking out. And then we'll also be running a retreat in Detroit in September coming up as well. That'll be the 27th to the 29th. The Cry of the Forerunner is the title of it. And we might be having, I won't talk too much, but there might be some interesting announcements to be made about other speakers coming there as well.
Excellent. We just have one super chat that has come in, and that came in from our buddy Blue Skitty. Blue Skitty says, Andy Reid's son, who's a coach on the team, also permanently injured a kid drunk driving. Story went away overnight. Yeah, exactly. The hypocrisy of the NFL is unreal. And to see the outrage over Harrison Butker certainly highlights the general disposition of the most masculine sports league are supposed to be. I think hockey is actually growing in the United States. It probably rivals the NFL, but yeah, very, very interesting cultural phenomenon. But many people have come out in support of him, and even fellow teammates. So maybe this is good for people starting to stand up and promote traditional values, but we'll see. Anyways, that looks like that's all the super chat. So, Paul, is there anything else that you want to leave with the people and let them know? And also, after we end the stream, you can always post links in the comment section. Is there any? You mentioned you're going to share a link in the live chat. Do you have that?
Well, I'll put in actually two links. So I think the first one will be for Manifesto Core, the online group that we are running. So this is the link to, if someone is interested in signing up or just looking at more information on that, reading up about it. The coupon code that will give you a 30% discount is COTEL. I'll put that in here as well. And then should I put in also Father Michael's link to the retreat in Essex? Again, we just have probably one place left because we're busy talking to a guy for the second last place. So Average to Elthra is Father Michael's website, and that's our pilgrimage to the United Kingdom that's coming up there. It's really going to be a great, we're going to go look at some ancient Christian sites around in the UK as well. We'll be renting a car and driving around to those, and then spending the time at the monastery as well. Excellent. That was it. Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate everything you're doing. And again, everybody go use coupon code COTEL. And if you're interested in joining the Manifesto core group, again, Father Michael, I believe he works with you as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. So Father Michael's running one of the groups, which is exclusively for Orthodox Christians. And he's looking, and catechumens as well. We have one or two catechumens that have been able to come in there, but they have to be on an active path towards becoming baptized to be in there. Yeah, he's looking to be starting a new group in the not too distant future as well. But yeah, there's a broad variety of groups. Father Michael's one of the team leaders on there as well. So if you're,
and how many how many people lead different groups within it?
There's nine groups right now.
9 groups. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So the groups are up to max. I think we have a max of 12. I think some groups have said max 14 guys, something like that. So there's some of them are smaller than that as well.
Excellent. Well, guys, use promo code COTEL. Again, he posted these links in the live chat, and then I will give him a wrench so that he could post some in the comment section once the video closes. So when people rewatch, there, I made you a standard moderator so you can post links. So when we get off, just go in the comment section and you can post your links. That way people can get access to everything that you guys are offering over there.
It's been such a pleasure being on here. Thanks, Patrick, and fantastic work. I've just more and more enjoyed watching your work. I tuned in with Father Peter Heers yesterday and enjoyed listening there as well. So just been really getting more and more into your stuff. So thanks so much for the opportunity to come in here and talk about something that I know from Father Michael and me is a really, really central part of what we're doing, and what I think you're really contributing a massive amount to strengthening men in a time where there's a very serious attack on just being a man in our society. And
absolutely,
so necessary. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, and appreciate all the work you guys are doing over there as well. And shout out to Father Michael. Always enjoy speaking with him. So I think that's going to do everything that we wanted to discuss. That's going to conclude the stream. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the people? Again, your links. So everybody go follow Paul. The link to his YouTube channel is both in the video title. You can click that hyperlink, or in the video description. I have links for both him and Father Michael. Both of their hyperlinks are also in the video title. So go support their work, go subscribe, and reach out to either one of them if you want to learn more about Manifesto. in their core groups. Let them know. And if you're already on board, just use those links that he already shared and go sign up. Use promo code COTEL and get 30% off. So
thank you very much. Yeah.
All right. Well, God bless you and your family. Again, we live in treacherous times. And so the fact that you got 3 boys, a wife, a homestead, I'm sure there's a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of burden on your shoulders, but at the same time, you're kind of living the dream that everybody wants to get to. So God bless you and your family.
God has been gracious, and may He hold it together as well, because it's probably beyond my ability to do. But thank you very much, and certainly having other good guys around me to be able to connect with is a good thing. So thanks, Patrick.
Yeah. All right. Well, everybody, I will see you all probably Monday. I'll be taking off this next few days so I can get some more research on my dissertation done and writing. But I will see you guys most likely Monday. So as always, until next time, God bless.